even if it's just a facade of stability. Harksun smirked. What if I refuse? Ryan asked, struggling. You could retire or... Harksun shifted topics. I heard your grandson, Clark, was injured at the tournament. Ryan's body stiffened, his eyes sharpening into daggers. What do you want? Relax, Harksun said innocently. He's a talent. My Iron Vault Guard needs a deputy commander. The capital is dangerous, full of assassins. If he isn't under my protection, an accident might happen. A grandfather burying his grandson. How tragic. It was a naked threat. Ryan's nails dug into his palms. He felt a profound, crushing helplessness. Unlike Robert's blade to the throat, Harksun's soft-edged knife was far more terrifying. The Medici tentacles were everywhere. If he refused, the Graham family would suffer an accident tonight. For the family, for Clark. Ryan closed his eyes and sighed, shedding his pride. I understand, Duke, Ryan said, his voice aged. I will continue as Prime Minister, for the kingdom's stability. Harksun nodded, satisfied. Good choice, Lord Ryan. Perhaps the Grahams will become the greatest ducal family in the royal territory. Pleasure doing business. Half an hour later, Ryan stumbled out. A servant led in Victor, the secret envoy of the Eastern Territories Russell family. Duke Harksun, an honor. Victor bowed, respectful but unafraid. He treated the merchant king with professional courtesy. Sit. Harksun gestured, his tone more polite than it had been with Ryan. It was a meeting of equals. To Harksun, the East was an independent power, a partner to trade with, not a subordinate to crush. I suppose it's easier to respect someone when you haven't threatened to bury their grandchildren yet. Robert was rude earlier. Please forgive him, Harksun said, casually taking the blame for his son. The marshal is busy. I understand, Victor replied with a practiced smile. Harksun cut to the chase. I know what Duke Russell is thinking. Watching the Tigers fight, waiting to pick up the pieces, right? Victor smiled thinly. The East only wishes to avoid unnecessary civil war and protect our lands. Protect your lands? Harksun laughed sharply. No one stays neutral in these times. And your watching strategy failed the moment I took power. Why? Victor asked. Because I have money, Harksun declared. I can outspend anyone. If the East stays idle, I'll spend my fortune on mercenaries to break the West first. Once the Medici control the South, the West, and the royal territory, do you think we'll care about the East? Victor fell silent. It was the Medici's greatest leverage. They could burn money to win any war. Let's cooperate, Harksun offered. I know the Eastern Army hasn't been idle while the North invaded. Harksun tossed an intelligence report to Victor. You seized 3 wealthy territories and mines, and even raised your flags over the key river passes. Victor was stunned by the Medici family's intelligence network. These are just for the capital's defense, he argued. The reason doesn't matter, Harksun interrupted. Only the result does. If the Eastern Territory cooperates, I, Harksun Medici, will formally recognize your rule over the regions you currently control. And that's not all, Harksun added. After the war, I will cede trade rights to White Gull Port and grant 10 years of tax exemptions to the Eastern Territory. The temptation was immense. Controlling White Gull Port would elevate the Russell family's wealth significantly. A generous offer, Victor noted calmly. But what is the price? Do you want us to attack the West? No, Harksun replied, tracing a line on the map. I'll handle the West. I just need you to mass troops at the border. Create a threat to pin down Lucius's main force so he cannot deploy fully. Tie up 30% of their strength, and the deal is done. Victor felt a chill. The old Viper was merely offering official recognition for land the East already held. It was a hollow gesture, trading nothing for military leverage. Duke, your calculation is indeed precise, Victor said coldly. However, this is a major matter. Your conditions are tempting, but they are merely titles. Victor emphasized titles to signal they were empty promises. I cannot decide this. I must report to Duke Russell. It was a classic stalling tactic. He needed to tell the Duke that the Medici were desperate, allowing them to raise their price. Understood, Harksun smiled. Do return quickly. My patience is limited. Victor bowed and left. Though nothing was signed, a tacit understanding was reached. The East would remain neutral, circling like a vulture, waiting for the spoils of war. Harksun stood before the map, staring at Thorn City. Still want more? He sneered. Greedy Russell, waiting to play both sides. Harksun knew the game. Viper, he whispered. You should be in Thorn City by now. I don't expect you to kill Lin, but if you can spill blood or cause chaos during the coronation, the Western Alliance will fracture. That would be a massive win. Outside, clouds hid the moon. In Thorn City, only 2 days remained until the coronation. The ancient city was packed. News of the princess's return and the new monarch's rise acted as a stimulant. Nobles, merchants, and opportunists flooded the city. Streets were jammed, inns were full, and tents covered the outskirts. The city was gripped by historical fervor, which is usually just a polite way of saying everyone was losing their minds. Yet, the security commanders remained tense. At La Roche Fortress, I and Lucius reviewed the defense map. I pointed to critical nodes, frowning. Too many people. We can't relax security just because we aren't using roadblocks. I looked up. Lucius, I feel like we're being watched. It was the chilling sensation of a predator lurking nearby, which is usually the point where I regret not staying in bed. Robert won't give up. If he can't win on the battlefield, he'll use shadows. Lucius nodded grimly. Double the patrols. Screen all outsiders, especially those bearing gifts, and keep the Golden Lion Knights at the cathedral and parade route. Meanwhile, a caravan from Maple Town entered the south gate. The owner was a balding, obsequious baron, followed by a pale, thin servant. The servant carried a wooden box, acting the part of a lowly lackey. He was actually Viper, the Medici family's elite assassin. The real servant was dead, buried in the woods. Viper had assumed his identity perfectly. He carried no obvious weapons. For an assassin of his caliber, steel was a liability. His weapons were his nails, his teeth, and lethal powders. While the baron sought lodging, Viper slipped away. He vanished into the crowd. He didn't rush toward the fortress. He was patient and cautious. He circled the fortress like a tourist. He quickly spotted the hidden sentries and shadows. 3 outposts, 2 patrols, and a powerful presence, Viper noted, eyes narrowing. The Golden Lion Knights had turned the fortress into an iron fortress. Assassination in the bedroom, 0 chance. He abandoned that plan immediately. He moved to the parade route, blending in with carpenters building the viewing stands. He calculated distances, heights, and wind directions. Too open, he thought. The wind is too erratic for poison, and the queen will be surrounded by cavalry and me. An ambush here has less than a 10% success rate. Another dead end, which is really just a fancy way of saying I'm wasting my time. Finally, his gaze settled on the towering Gothic structure, Thorn Cathedral, the end of the coronation and the final destination for all glory and sin. Disguised as a gardener, Viper infiltrated the cathedral to trim the altar lilies. Inside, he noted the high dome and sealed windows, an enclosed space. He realized the queen must kneel at the altar and remove her helmet, exposing her neck at a fixed position. The target's location was inevitable and unavoidable. Here is your grave, Viper thought, eyeing the throne. This was only the first step. That night, he slipped into a derelict cellar in the western slums. Amidst the filth, he experimented on stray dogs and a drunken vagrant. The drunkard slept, unaware he was a test subject for death. Viper produced a vial of tears of the goddess. A Medici procured, colorless, odorless, and lethal neurotoxin. He trusted only his own results. Test 1, airborne. Wearing a mask, he spiked the cathedral's incense with the toxin. He watched the drunkard as the smoke rose. It took 7 minutes for the victim to show tremors and respiratory distress. Too slow, Viper muttered, extinguishing the incense. 7 minutes was enough for Knights to kill him 100 times over. He tested contact transmission on a dog. It died in 10 seconds. However, poisoning the clergy first would alert the guards. He needed a more violent, instantaneous method. He settled on an alchemy-crafted black sphere and blue-glowing bone-piercing nails. He decided on a combo, a modified explosive poison bead. It would create a blinding, toxic fog upon detonation, causing instant suffocation. He would follow up with poison nails while the crowd was blinded. He practiced throwing the bead at the drunkard repeatedly. He practiced until he could hit the target blindfolded, ensuring the fog would engulf the throne. I'm sure the drunkard would have appreciated the dedication if he were actually awake for it. A perfect kill, but he needed an escape route to claim his reward. He discovered a hidden ventilation shaft on the cathedral's flank. It connected to the city's ancient drainage system. He used a diamond-dusted saw to cut the rusted iron grate. The sound was masked by the night wind. He camouflaged the cut with mud and moss. It looked intact, but would give way instantly. He stashed supplies, clothes, gold, and food in the sewer. His plan: strike, create chaos, and vanish into the sewers. He would change clothes, wash off the scent, and blend into the crowd. By the time I and Lucius reacted, he would be miles away. Emerging from the sewer at dawn, he smiled at the cathedral. Tomorrow, you become a tomb. The cathedral bells rang. 12 heavy tolls echoed. Noon had arrived. A new era for the Orlando kingdom began. The square was packed. Tens of thousands, mercenaries, farmers, and refugees, waited. They stood like statues, watching the oak doors. Inside, the atmosphere was solemn, lit by hundreds of candles. A red carpet stretched to the altar like a river of blood. Nobles and knights lined the path, all looking very expensive and very bored. They watched the entrance. "Welcome, Lady Lynn Aurora," the herald announced. Sunlight flooded in as Lynn entered. She wore a custom red and black gown, not traditional white. Black for the West's iron will, red for the Aurora family's vengeance. The cut was sharp and martial, flanked by Lucius LaRoche and Marquis Leon Black. I followed closely behind, hand on my sword. It's always comforting to know that in a room full of high society types, I'm the only one expecting a disaster. The hall was silent save for their footsteps. Lynn looked pale but resolute. She reached the altar. Archbishop Timmy held the golden, ruby-encrusted crown. "In the name of the gods and the Caesar bloodline," Timmy intoned. "Do you accept?" The crowd held its breath. Lynn knelt. Timmy raised the crown. The moment arrived. Viper, hidden in the front row, opened his eyes. He crushed 3 explosive poison beads in his palms. A thunderous explosion rocked the altar. A thick, black-purple toxic fog erupted, lunging toward the kneeling queen like a demon. "Ah!" The surrounding nobles shrieked in terror. Those who inhaled even a trace of the toxic mist collapsed, foaming at the mouth and convulsing. That wasn't the killing blow. Under the cover of the blinding purple fog, Viper opened his mouth and flicked his tongue. Uft, uft, uft. 3-finger-length, deep blue bone-piercing nails were spat out with refined battle chi, flying like meteors toward Lynn's exposed throat. It was a meticulously planned assassination. The poison blinded, the nails killed. Even a knight would struggle to survive, but Robert underestimated the man behind the queen. Almost the instant the poison orb shattered, the moment Viper's muscle twitched. I moved. I didn't waste time shouting for guards. I didn't pull Lynn back. It was too slow compared to the projectiles. Clang! I sidestepped, snatching a sword from a stunned golden lion knight. Instead of retreating, I stepped forward, shielding Lynn like a mountain. Huh! With a roar, I unleashed my battle chi. A silver radiance flared as I swung my blade. High-speed vibrations and released battle chi created a violent vortex of air. Whoosh! The incoming toxic mist was blown apart, swirling away to both sides. Visibility returned instantly. Ding! 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 3 crisp metallic sounds rang out. My sword moved with a life of its own, tracing 3 perfect arcs to strike the bone-piercing nails. Sparks flew as the lethal nails were deflected into a stone pillar. What? Viper's dead eyes widened in terror. He had blocked them? To clear the mist and deflect invisible nails simultaneously. Was this man a monster? Retreat. Viper turned and sprinted toward a ventilation duct covered by ivy, his pre-planned escape route leading to the sewers. Ignoring the knight's roars, he reached the vent in a flash. I made it. Viper reached to push the loosened iron grate. Clang! His hand slammed against it, the impact jarring his bones. Apparently, he'd forgotten that I'd personally welded it shut that morning. The grate he had sawed through the night before wouldn't budge. Viper panicked, pushing frantically. He realized with horror that the base had been sealed with molten iron, turning the vent into a solid wall. "This path is closed." An elegant, aged voice, cold as the grave, drifted from the shadows. Viper spun around. Emerging from the darkness was an elderly butler in a tuxedo, hair perfectly groomed. It was Sebastian, my butler, casually tossing the assassin's own hidden weapons. I checked every gap 3 times waiting for you, little rat. Viper's heart sank. A trap. He was surrounded. Driven to hysteria, Viper's eyes flashed with madness. If I can't leave, we all die. He puffed out his chest, preparing to detonate his internal poison sac. It would leave nothing alive within 10 meters. Roar. But before he could act, a roar like a giant bear accompanied a suffocating gust of wind. Buck, the gold-ranked giant, charged like a magical beast. He didn't bother with weapons. His fist, wreathed in golden battle chi, struck Viper's chest with a sonic boom. Crack. Viper's chest caved in, his shoulder blade shattered. Ugh. Vomiting blood and viscera, Viper collapsed like a broken doll, unable to move a finger. Protect the queen. Seize the assassin. The knights and nobles finally erupted into chaotic screams. The church was sealed. I ignored the assassin to check on Lynn. Finding her steady, I turned, my face dark. I walked to the bleeding assassin. Did Robert send you? I asked coldly. Viper could only glare with venomous eyes. I sneered. He really should have picked a less dramatic line of work. There was no need for interrogation. Everyone knew the truth. I stepped on Viper's head, pinning him to the floor. I looked up at the terrified nobles and the thousands of citizens watching from outside. I pointed my sword toward the east. Look closely, I warned. This is the royal capital's answer. This is Robert Medici's gift. He has declared war on us with poison and blades at our coronation. Silence fell. Everyone stared at the assassin and the charred, poisoned floor. Fury ignited in the hearts of the Westerners. I raised my sword. Swish. Viper's head rolled to the ground. Blood sprayed, staining the sacred steps and white lilies. Amidst the scent of blood, Lynn, the young queen, did not flinch. She pushed away her handmaid. Lifting her gown, she stepped directly into the pool of blood in her crystal shoes. Each footprint on the white stairs marked a path of blood toward power. Reaching the altar, she picked up the heavy golden crown and placed it firmly on her own head. Clang. The sound signaled a new era. She turned to the stunned crowd, pointing at the corpse and then toward the east. Her voice was cold, firm, and regal. Medici wants war. Then let it be so. Western border, give him war. The words ignited the world like a torch in an oil drum. Long live the queen. Vengeance. Kill the Medici. Nobles and peasants alike drew their swords, roaring in unison. The sound wave was a physical storm that shook the clouds over Thorn City. The passion of the coronation faded, and the night in Thorn City returned to a cold, grim stillness. Inside the La Roche Fortress War Room, candlelight flickered over the massive map of the western border. The fervor of the day was gone, replaced by a suffocating, heavy tension. At the long table, Lucius, the administrator of the West, frowned at the thick ledgers delivered by the logistics officer. It was the kind of paperwork that made me miss the simplicity of just killing assassins. The situation is worse than we anticipated, Lucius sighed, rubbing his temples. While morale is high and the Queen's ascension gives us legitimacy, the reality is brutal. Pointing at the red ink in the ledgers, he said grimly, "War is fought with money and grain. Robert may be a military amateur, but he is a viper when it comes to economic blockades. Intelligence confirms that the Medici family cut off all trade routes in the West the moment we declared independence. They've blocked trade and used their immense wealth to buy up grain, iron, and medicine in all neutral territories at triple the price." Marquis Leon Black nodded gravely. "I've heard the same. Prices in the West are skyrocketing. Grain costs have doubled. Thorn City's reserves are decent, but we have more than just the original garrison to feed. At least 50,000 troops," Leon said heavily, excluding the logistics laborers. "The daily consumption is astronomical. At this rate, the Western Treasury will be empty in 2 months. If we don't open the southern trade routes in 2 months, we'll collapse from starvation before Robert even attacks." The hall fell silent. The old-school nobles present grew restless. They had been swept up in the fervor of the Queen's ascension, pledging to fight alongside the La Roche and Pendragon families. But faced with cold bills, their courage wavered. An elderly count stood up, wiping sweat. "Administrator, given the economic strain, shouldn't we change strategy?" Attacking the capital is too risky and costly. Why not switch to a defensive stance? We could hold out using the fortifications of Silver Bell Castle and Thorn City. Other lords chimed in, agreeing. We can't afford this war. What's the point of winning if we exhaust all our resources? This defeatist sentiment spread like a plague across the table. Before a single battle was fought, the financial burden had already spooked these penny-pinching nobles. It's amazing how quickly a noble's thirst for glory evaporates when they realize they might have to pay for it. Lucius and Leon exchanged a look of helplessness. Despite their political and military prowess, they were at a loss against this level of economic strangulation. Suddenly, a sharp sound shattered the gloom. I, who had been sitting silently in the corner, stood up and slammed a prepared parchment onto the table. All eyes turned to me. The document was titled, Western Territory Special Military Bond Issuance Plan. Bonds. What are those? The nobles asked, confused. In this era, war was funded only by taxes, plunder, or the lord's personal wealth. No one had ever heard of debt as a tool. Apparently, the concept of owing money to people you don't intend to kill immediately was a revolutionary breakthrough. We don't need to levy war taxes or beg merchants for donations, I said. I surveyed the room, my voice calm and confident, as if I were discussing how to collect gold. The West has plenty of money. It's just sitting in merchants' cellars, your private vaults, or hidden under commoners' floorboards. We aren't going to steal it, I said, my eyes glinting with cunning. We are going to sell them shares of victory. Shares? Lucius paused, intrigued. Eli explained. I laid out my plan, adapting modern financial concepts. We will issue war bonds backed by the century-old prestige of the LaRoche and Pendragon families and the name of Queen Lynn. Anyone, nobles, merchants, or commoners, can buy them in denominations from 10 to 100 gold coins. We promise higher interest than any bank, and more importantly, I pointed firmly at the wealthy southern regions on the map. Large holders will receive priority purchase rights for southern lands seized from the Medici, plus 5 years of tax-free trade. For massive investments, we'll even grant honorary titles in the new kingdom. The room gasped. This wasn't borrowing. It was pre-selling the unconquered land as a tempting cake. We will use the Medici's greatest weapon, greed, to defeat them. I sneered at the now excited nobles. Robert buys mercenaries lives with gold. We will buy the hearts of the West with future profits. Once they buy these bonds, they are no longer bystanders. To turn their paper into gold, they will crave victory and the fall of the capital even more than we do. Lucius slammed the table, his eyes blazing. Brilliant. Shares of victory. Do it. Print the bonds immediately. We start sales at Thorn Square tomorrow morning. The next morning, a massive wooden platform stood in the center of Thorn City. Black armored soldiers kept order as banners for the Western war bonds fluttered in the wind. Despite the perfect plan, the square remained crowded but hesitant for hours. Everyone was watching. Trading real gold for a piece of parchment that required a victory to be worth anything seemed too risky, but apparently, people are suckers for a good brochure. Can this really get me a title? What if the queen loses to Robert? As whispers spread, the officials grew anxious. Suddenly, a roar came from the crowd. Make way. A group of merchants in silk robes pushed through the crowd. Leading them was Thor, the North Chamber of Commerce's Western representative, the man who had already joined my cause in Spring City. Thor looked radiant, followed by men carrying heavy chests. Bang, bang, bang. The chests were slammed onto the registration table. When opened, the golden glow blinded the onlookers. The North Chamber of Commerce subscribes to the war bonds, 50,000 gold coins. Thor shouted so the whole square could hear. For the queen, to drive out the false king. And for future business, we're in for 50,000. I believe in Lord Eli's sword. I believe the West will win. The crowd erupted. 50,000 gold. If the shrewd North Chamber was betting this big, maybe there was real potential. Amidst the commotion, I, standing in the shadows of the platform, signaled a loud-voiced subordinate in plain clothes. The subordinate, his plant, understood immediately. He jumped up, waving a large notice, and bellowed the most tempting terms. By the Queen's decree, holders of 5,000 gold in bonds get priority for 100 acres of fertile southern land and an honorary knight title. Holders of 50,000 gold get a non-hereditary honorary barren title and permanent tax-free status on southern trade routes. Boom! The words hit the crowd like a spark in a powder keg. Land. Titles. Tax exemptions. For wealthy merchants without status and commoners craving land, this was more addictive than any drug. These assets, usually the exclusive domain of high nobles, were now accessible to the public. People realized these bonds were tickets into the upper class. "I'll buy 5,000, they clamored. The situation spiraled as crowds fought to purchase titles in southern farmland. The hesitant masses turned frantic, waving money bags like zombies, desperate to secure their future. It's amazing what people will do for a fancy title they can't actually inherit. Even elderly women emptied their life savings. Gold flowed into chests for 3 straight days until the registrars were exhausted. Lucius LaRoche trembled as he reviewed the final tally. The funds raised exceeded the entire western border's tax revenue from the previous year, filling the LaRoche fortress basement with gold. The war machine was activated. With ample funding, the western border's rusted military apparatus began to run at full capacity. Thorn City's blacksmiths worked day and night, the glow of their furnaces reddening the sky as they churned out armor and weapons. Small lords, having invested heavily in bonds, were now more anxious for victory than anyone. To protect their investments, they mobilized their private soldiers and grain stores, desperate for the promised rewards. They actively assisted in logistics, praying for a western border victory. I stood atop the walls of Thorn City, watching the bustling activity and supply lines. A meaningful smile touched my lips. I had succeeded. I had transformed a noble feud into a war of wealth for the entire western border. In the royal capital Orlandia, the Sun Palace had been freshly renovated. Its golden tiles shimmered brilliantly under the sun. Yet, beneath the splendor, the palace was suffocating with tension. The silence of the South Gate Square was shattered by frantic hoofbeats. A knight in Southern Territory armor rode a foaming horse through the gate. Covered in dust and blood, the released prisoner screamed for the Duke, desperate to deliver urgent news. He carried a black-wrapped object and a red, wax-sealed letter. Guards recognized the western border official seal and immediately cleared his path to the Sun Palace. Half an hour later, Robert Medici paced the council hall in agitation. Since the Viper went silent, Robert had been plagued by a cold, ominous premonition. The prisoner burst in, kneeling as he presented the black package. Robert grabbed it, trembling as he unwrapped it. A preserved head rolled out, stopping at Robert's feet. It was the Viper. His face was frozen in a mask of sheer terror. The dead assassin's visage mocked Robert's incompetence, though I suppose it's hard to look professional when you're currently a severed head. Robert stumbled back, horrified that the Medici family's sharpest blade had been discarded like common poultry. The prisoner presented the red letter, which Robert opened with shaking hands. The note was brief and lethal, using this head to signal war. "Clean your neck and wait for me." It was signed by Queen Orlando, Lynn Aurora. Robert dropped the letter, stunned. He had hoped the assassination would at least sow chaos or poison key figures at the coronation. Instead, the western border remained unscathed and used the event to unify their people. This was a death warrant from the woman he had underestimated. Duke Harksun Medici spoke calmly from the throne. Harksun sipped tea, as if watching a trivial play. He ordered the head thrown to the dogs and picked up the letter. He studied the handwriting and the scent of the ink. No weeping, no nonsense. Just a direct declaration of war and absolute resolve. A trace of admiration appeared on Harksun's face. "Lucius's granddaughter has more backbone than I imagined." He looked at the terrified Robert with stern disappointment. "Robert, don't you see? This letter signals that the western border has unified its power. Eli, Lucius, and Lynn are now an unbreakable iron wall." Harksun tossed the letter into the brazier, watching it burn. The assassination failure was expected. It was a gamble. He tapped the table, signaling that the game was over. "It's nice to know my life-or-death struggle was just a casual afternoon pastime for him. Stop your petty tricks. Poison and backstabbing are child's play against absolute force. We are now in a total war." Robert bowed his head in shame. Harksun turned to the military map, his eyes fixed on the strategic points between the royal territory and the western border. "If they want to fight, We shall oblige. Harksun produced the seal to command all Medici private soldiers. He issued a cold, decisive order. Command Patton Medici to lead 20,000 of the elite Violet Legion to Splendor Fortress immediately. He marked Splendor Fortress, Red Maple Fortress, and Black River Ferry on the map, the Iron Triangle. His mission is not to attack, but to hold this defensive line. Harksun's eyes glinted with ruthless calculation. It's a shame he didn't put that much effort into his haircut. The western border has high morale but thin resources. Every day of war costs a fortune. Let them attack and bleed themselves dry against our defenses. Drain them of their blood. Every step they take must cost them an equal weight in gold or corpses. It was a war of attrition. Harksun knew the Medici wealth would outlast the western border's stability. Patton Medici received the seal and orders, a bloodthirsty smirk appearing on his face. Hold the line. Patton mounted his horse. As long as the logistics and gold keep flowing, he promised. Splendor Fortress will be the Westerners' graveyard. Move out. 20,000 elite Violet Legion soldiers marched toward the western border. News of the western border's declaration of war spread like a plague, plunging the royal capital's nobility into panic. Those who had been silenced by Harksun's ledgers began to stir once more. In private salons, they whispered of me, the white-haired Reaper, and my terrifying combat record. I suppose it's nice to be known for something other than my poor taste in interior design. Rumors spread. I had slaughtered 3,000 in the Valley of Winds and terrified the Northern Duke. Merchants, sensing the shift, began hoarding grain, salt, and cloth, preparing for the coming siege. Overnight, the capital's grain stores were emptied by speculators. Grain prices surged by 30%, devastating the commoners already struggling in the wake of war. They are courting death, Harksun remarked coldly, deciding to act. That afternoon, the Iron Vault Guard raided 2 minor merchant guilds that had led the hoarding and spread rumors of the capital's inevitable defeat. There was no trial, no defense. 2 severed heads were displayed at the grain market, accompanied by Harksun's decree. Those who disrupt the market shall be executed. All grain is to be requisitioned at pre-war prices. This brutal display stabilized prices and reinforced a chilling truth. Under the Medici family, even fear was strictly regulated. That evening, Harksun stood on the Sun Palace terrace. Watching the dark western clouds, he remained steady, his hand firm on his ring. He turned his emerald ring, the symbol of Medici power, his eyes gleaming like a predator's. "Lin Aurora," he whispered. "You want war? Let's see if your sword is faster than my gold. I've prepared this golden cage for you. Enter." At La Roche Fortress, the war room was ablaze with light. A massive iron table held a detailed map of the current front. The elite of the western border gathered around it. Lucius, the western governor, sat at the head, pale but sharp-eyed. To his left sat I and my father, Marquis Leon Black. To his right were the powerful marquises, the hot-tempered Marcus Hohenzollern, the seasoned Toscana Fernando, and the cavalry expert Marquis Fryclair. Also present were the siege-hardened Marquis Milan Winterborn and Marquis Claude. Despite their usual confidence, the map before them caused deep concern. "The situation is more difficult than anticipated," Toscana said, breaking the silence. He pointed to 3 red markers arranged in a triangle on the map. Harksun's Iron Triangle defense. Splendor Fortress is the center, held by Patton Medici and 20,000 Violet Legion elites. It's armed with over 500 giant crossbows and countless catapults. The Red Maple Fortress on the left and the Black River Ferry to the rear right form the rest of the triangle. They support each other. Any attack on one brings reinforcements from the others within half a day. The flanks are packed with mercenaries. While not as elite as the Violet Legion, their sheer numbers create a sea of soldiers' tactic. Toscana sighed. "It's a golden turtle shell, hard and dangerous to touch." Marcus slammed the table. "When have we ever feared a hard bone? We are the western border." Marcus pointed to the Red Maple Fortress. "I propose we concentrate all our forces, the Obsidian Territory Iron Cavalry and our heavy infantry, and launch a full-scale assault. Break one corner, and the flank of Splendor Fortress is exposed." "No," Marquis Claire interrupted coldly. "You're being reckless, Marcus. Red Maple is strategically positioned and difficult to take. The casualties would be catastrophic. Claire's gaze deepened. This is Harkson's trap. He wants to bleed us dry with mercenaries. The Medici family has endless gold to fund reinforcements. It's nice to know some people have a hobby besides hoarding misery. Can we afford a war of attrition? Marcus fumed. So we just sit here? Marquis Claude sighed. It's a golden turtle shell with no entry point. Split our forces and we're picked off. Concentrate and we're flanked. Harkson is a cunning fox. The situation seemed deadlocked. Conventional tactics felt useless against such a resource-heavy defense. Lucius tapped the table, silencing the room. Quartermaster. An official stepped from the shadows, trembling with a ledger. Report the figures. The quartermaster read, "We have 50,000 men and 30,000 horses. Daily consumption is 4,000 stones of grain and 5,000 bundles of fodder. Our treasury is depleting rapidly to maintain this force and pay interest on war bonds. At this rate, without new funds or plunder, our finances will collapse in 3 months. After 3 months, our army will dissolve from lack of pay and food." Silence fell. The news extinguished the remaining fire in the room. 3 months, the sword of Damocles hanging over the West. It's a lovely metaphor, provided you're not the one currently sitting under the blade. Lucius looked at his commanders. You heard him. We are racing against time, not just fighting Robert. Harkson built the Iron Triangle, knowing we lack the resources for a long war. We cannot afford attrition or probing attacks. We must strike a fatal blow. We must tear through this shell and pierce the Medici heart immediately. As everyone struggled for a solution, I reached out. My finger traced past the front lines, pointing deep into the rear. I indicated the Black River Ferry, the node connecting the fortresses. Here, I said calmly. Attack here. The Black River Ferry? Toscana asked, stunned. Eli, are you mad? That's deep behind their lines. How do we get there? And it's still heavily guarded. I ignored the skepticism, my eyes fixed on the point. Look, everyone. The Black River Ferry is the Medici family's sole waterway for transporting supplies from the Southern Territory to the front lines. It handles all food, oil, arrows, and mercenary wages. I smirked at the group, enjoying the rare moment where I was the only one in the room with a functioning map. Robert and Patton think it's safe behind Splendor Fortress and Red Maple Fortress, believing we can't reach it. My intelligence confirms it is actually their most poorly defended point. With most troops at the front, only second-rate mercenaries and laborers remain there. I clench my fist. If we take it out, Splendor Fortress will lose its supplies, and those mercenaries will mutiny. The Iron Triangle will collapse. The others grew excited. It was a brilliant, ruthless plan. Marquis Fryclair frowned. The plan is sound, but how do we get there without being seen? Splitting our forces weakens our front. Patton isn't a fool. If he senses our main force is thin, he'll strike from Splendor Fortress. I nodded gravely. To succeed, we must force a decisive confrontation on the front lines. We must act like mad dogs, pinning Patton down so he believes we are launching an all-out assault on Splendor Fortress. He won't dare split his forces. He might even be forced to pull troops from the rear to support the front. My voice turned dry. The frontal decoy force will face the full brunt of the Medici firepower. It will be a bloodbath. The tent fell silent. Everyone understood this was a suicide mission. The frontal force would be the bait. Who would sacrifice their own house for this? It's a tough sell, even with a generous severance package. Marquis Leon Black stood up, wiping his armor. He adjusted his new mithril armor and smiled calmly. Let this old man handle it. I frowned, but Leon waved me off. Robert hates me most. My face is the perfect bait. If I appear under the walls of Splendor Fortress, Leon's eyes sharpened. Patton will bite like a mad dog, hoping to take my head for Robert. I'll lead the garrison legion. Count Eli in. Marcus Hohenzollern stood up, followed by Toscana Fernando. We 3 old men didn't die at the Valley of Winds. Let's finish this together. The younger men were moved by the spirit of these veterans. This was the backbone of the West. Lucius stood up, eyes tearing. Left flank. The main decoy, Leon, Marcus, and Toscana will lead 30,000 infantry and shield-bearers to Splendor Fortress. Make as much noise as possible. Act like you're fighting to the death. The veterans agreed. Right flank. Harassment. Winterborn and Marquis Fryclair will lead 10,000 light cavalry around Red Maple Fortress. Create dust and chaos so the enemy fears a pincer attack and stays put. Lucius turned to me. Center. The surprise attack. I take all the Obsidian Territory Iron Cavalry and the Black Family's elite. A storm is coming tomorrow night. Use the rain for cover. Silence your horses and men. Slip through Ghost Cry Gorge. Strike the Black River Ferry directly. You have one chance. If you fail, your father and this army will never return. I drew my sword, pointing it skyward. I will complete the mission. Lucius raised a glass. Nothing says, I believe in your competence, quite like a toast before a suicide mission. He looked at his partners, who were entrusting their lives to one another. To the west. To a glorious death. The glasses clinked, signaling the start of the counterattack. The next morning, as the sun broke through the clouds, the camp outside La Roche Fortress erupted. No more hiding. Horns blared as the main Western Army broke camp. All troops. Target. Splendor Fortress. Marquis Leon Black, in his mithril armor, pointed his sword east. Behind him, Marcus and Toscana led 30,000 infantry. They marched openly, wanting the world to see. Banners of the Golden Lion, Black Dragon, and Giant Eagle fluttered in the wind. Drums beat like a giant's heartbeat, shaking the earth. Tie branches to the wagons. Move. Marcus roared the seemingly absurd order. Hundreds of empty supply wagons dragged massive, dead branches. The friction kicked up massive clouds of dust. The sky turned yellow with sand. From afar, the dust and banners made the 30,000-man force look like an army of 50,000 to 80,000. This was their mission, to deceive Patton, to convince Splendor Fortress that the full weight of the West had arrived. Meanwhile, on the right flank, Marquis Fryclair's 10,000 cavalry acted like a pack of wolves. They circled Red Maple Fortress, horns blaring incessantly. They feigned attacks on supply lines and fortress gates. Every feint forced the defenders to sound alarms, keeping them on edge. The Western Front was a boiling cauldron of killing intent and dust. It was a grand performance on a stage soon to be stained with blood. Splendor Fortress, command room. The throat of the West bared its fangs. Patton stood on the watchtower, observing the distant dust clouds through a telescope. A scout rushed up, sweating. General, the Western main force is moving. The enemy is massive. Banners everywhere, dust covering the sky. At least 50,000 troops. All the major marquises, Black, Hohenzollern, Toscana, are in the ranks. Also, Red Maple Fortress reports heavy cavalry harassment and requests reinforcements. Patton lowered his binoculars, sneering at the report. Just as Harksun predicted, he told Robert, who had been sent from the royal capital. Pointing to the distant dust clouds, Patton declared, they're desperate. Their logistics are failing, and their war bonds are a bottomless pit. They can't afford to wait, so they're gambling everything on a frontal assault at Splendor Fortress to break our lines while their morale holds. Robert adjusted his gloves, watching the approaching dust like a man observing moths flying into a flame. Though I'm sure the moths would appreciate a little less theatricality. Trying to fill my moat with corpses? Robert mocked. How naive. Do they think Splendor Fortress is some open field like the Valley of Winds? Issue the orders. Red Maple Fortress and Black River Ferry are to hold firm. No sorties, no reinforcements for Splendor Fortress. We seal this shell tight. Robert turned to Patton. As for these mad dogs, General, prepare a grand welcome. Deploy all alchemical ballistae and load the catapults. If they enter range, unleash everything. I want this wasteland to be a graveyard for the Western border soldiers. Patton licked his lips, eager to see them burn in alchemical fire oil. Night fell, but the stars were hidden by a cold, predicted winter rain. As the Western border weather officers had warned, a frigid winter rain arrived on the north wind. The rain poured down. The icy deluge washed away the day's dust, shrouding the world in cold, wet darkness. At a hidden crossroads, two forces stood in silence. Marquis Leon Black and Marcus Hohenzollern's 30,000 infantry, and a separate, chilling force. Despite the rain, the infantry maintained a solemn, tragic formation. Opposite them stood 3,000 cavalrymen in black armor, my strike force. Their masks dripped with rain, failing to mask their lethal intent. Leon stood in the mud, his mithril armor gleaming. He removed his helmet, letting the rain wash over his scarred face and white hair. He looked at his son, me, mounted and ready to vanish into the night. No tears, no melodrama, just a soldier's farewell. Leon patted my mount, Chase, firmly. Eli, Leon said, his voice steady through the rain. Go. I'll make enough noise to cover you. We'll attack Splendor Fortress like lunatics, convincing that fool Patton we've lost our minds. My drums will drown out the thunder, and our cries will shatter their eardrums, loud enough that they won't hear your hooves. It was a father's promise to his son, and a decoy's vow to the strike force. In this moment, Leon was no longer a politician bowing to Robert. He was a warrior, a stepping stone willing to be crushed for victory. I gripped my reins, my knuckles white. It's amazing how much courage you can find when you're terrified of disappointing your father. I choked back my emotions, knowing tears would dishonor my father's resolve. I struck my chest in a knight's salute. Take care. With that, I turned and led my army into the dark. Don't look back. Just win, Leon whispered. He donned his helmet and faced his 30,000 men. Brothers, tonight, we show the Medici family the fury of the West. Attack. My cavalry vanished into the rain, becoming ghosts. They maintained strict light discipline. No torches, no words. Every soldier bit down on a wooden whistle to prevent accidental noise. Their horses' hooves were wrapped in thick cotton and leather. Each step was a muffled thud, swallowed by the rain. Even their armor joints were greased to prevent metallic clanking. It was a race against death, which is usually a bad time to realize I'm not a cardio person. They had to traverse the Ghost Cry Gorge between the fortresses, an impossible maneuver under the enemy's nose. The torrential rain masked their movement, but turned the terrain into a nightmare. The mud became a lethal swamp, threatening to snap horse legs. Wolfgang, the wolf-blooded warrior, led the way on foot alongside his ward pack. They were the eyes and nose of the unit. Using animal instinct, they navigated the only solid paths, avoiding the deadly bogs. The column wound through the rain. Cold and exhaustion gnawed at them, but no one lagged or complained. Fear was absent, replaced by a suffocating, suppressed bloodlust. They knew their comrades were currently dying under the enemy's ballistae and catapults. Every second of delay cost lives. I rode through the downpour, my silver eyes glowing like ghost fire in the dark. I stared toward the Black River Ferry, the heart of the Medici family. Wait for me, Robert, I thought. My blade is sharpened. The darkness before dawn was suffocating. As the first light touched the horizon, the war drums, silent all night, suddenly erupted like the heartbeat of hell. Hundreds of oxhide drums roared, drowning out the wind. Marquis Leon Black sat at the front of his formation. He stared through the mist at the massive bulk of Splendor Fortress. No probes, no skirmishes. Today's mission was simple, total assault. All units, heed me. Leon drew his sword, the Guardian, its blade reflecting the cold dawn. For the West. For the Queen. Attack. 3,000 soldiers roared, a black tide surging under the Golden Lion banner. They charged with ladders, siege towers, and catapults, launching a desperate assault. This was no feint. To deceive the cunning Patton, Marcus committed to a genuine, lethal strike. Fire. Marcus signaled. Dozens of heavy catapults launched, sending massive stones screaming toward the fortress walls. The walls trembled under the impact. The intensity of the western assault shocked the southern defenders. However, Patton stood in the command tower of Splendor Fortress, watching the black tide of the western border army approach without a hint of fear. Sipping red wine, he sneered at the dense crowd below. So, this is the vaunted main force of the West. Just a bunch of barbarians relying on brute strength. He set down his glass, adjusted his pristine white gloves, and calmly ordered his adjutant. If they want to die, grant them their wish. Activate the alchemical siege crossbows. Teach them what real warfare is. Yes, General. As the order echoed, a grating sound of gears turning erupted from the wide ramparts of Splendor Fortress. From behind the battlements, hundreds of menacing siege crossbows made of brass and steel rose into view. These crossbows were 3 times the size of standard ballistae, engraved with complex, glowing red runes. They were not loaded with ordinary bolts. Instead, they held 2-meter-long, custom-made shells tipped with massive metal cylinders. Each shell cost hundreds of gold coins. Every volley Patton ordered was a literal rain of thousands of gold coins. I've always said that if you're going to kill someone, you might as well do it with extreme financial irresponsibility. Ready, fire. The terrifying snap of bowstrings drowned out the battlefield's war cries. Hundreds of magic-guided shells arced through the air, striking the western border's charging ranks and their slow-moving siege towers. Raise shields, the western commander roared, but there was no impact, only explosions. The metal cylinders detonated in midair, unleashing orange flames and acrid green acid mist. It was highly concentrated alchemical fire oil and acid capable of melting steel. Shrieks of agony pierced the sky. The sturdy shield walls crumbled like paper before these expensive alchemical weapons. The fire oil turned soldiers into human torches, while the acid mist rotted their internal organs upon inhalation. Several shells struck the siege towers, causing the wooden structures to collapse and sending elite soldiers plummeting into the sea of fire below. A single volley. The western vanguard was decimated. Marquis Leon Black watched the Hell's Cape, his hand trembling on his sword. His heart bled for his veteran soldiers and kin, but he could not retreat. He had to keep acting, making the tragedy appear real enough to deceive Patton completely. Do not retreat. Leon roared, his eyes bloodshot. Reserves, move up. Push the towers. Use the catapults. I will execute anyone who falls back. To make the ruse convincing, Leon spurred his horse to the front lines. Plant my standard here. He drove his massive black raven banner into the ground, less than 300 meters from the fortress walls. It was a suicidal provocation, placing him directly within the enemy's kill zone. For the West. For victory, Leon shouted, his aged figure standing defiantly amidst the smoke and fire. Charge! Inspired by their commander's refusal to retreat, the wavering Western soldiers found their final reserve of courage. They surged forward, trampling their comrades' corpses, braving the rain of fire and acid. In the command tower, Patton mocked the struggling soldiers. Look at these foolish barbarians. They think they can break gold with bone. Let them burn. I have endless wealth for ammunition. General, an officer shouted, pointing below. Look, that is Leon Black's standard. What? Patton grabbed his telescope. Through the lens, he saw the white-haired old general in mithril armor, frantically directing the charge. Bolts whistled past Leon's helmet, yet he stood as still as a statue. It really is him. Patton's disdain vanished, replaced by the predatory joy of a hunter seeing his prey trapped. He's even committed his personal standard. Patton muttered. They are desperate. This is their final, all-or-nothing gamble. As a veteran commander, Patton trusted his judgment. No one would suffer such casualties or place their commander in such danger for a mere feint. Apparently, he's never met a politician. Leon was fighting for his life. Good. Excellent. Patton smashed his glass. Since you've come to die, I won't refuse. This was the perfect opportunity to annihilate the Western main force and kill Leon Black once and for all. Pass my orders. Patton roared at his messengers. Pull all reserves to the walls. And send word to Red Maple Fortress and Black River Ferry. Have them ship every supply, every drop of fire oil, every arrow, and all reserve mercenaries here immediately. I will wipe out the Western main force right here at Splendor Fortress. Carrier pigeons took flight. Patton was certain this was the final battle. Meanwhile, 100 miles away at Black River Ferry, the morning was eerily quiet after a night of rain. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and mist rising from the Black River. The reeds swayed in the wind with a soft rustling sound. Hidden deep within the reeds, pairs of cold, wolf-like eyes watched the camp. I lay in the mud, my armor soaked by dew, barely daring to breathe. I pressed my ear to the ground, listening to the distant, thunderous rumble of artillery. It has begun, I thought. My father was bleeding, and 30,000 men were buying me time. Hurry, Patton, you greedy bastard. Take the bait. Suddenly, the ferry camp erupted in chaos. Move. Frontline urgent report. Splendor Fortress needs support. Load the fire oil and arrows. Gather the 3,000 mercenaries and depart immediately. I peered through the reeds. The once guarded camp was in total disarray. Soldiers scrambled to load supplies, and mercenary units were mobilizing to leave. Patton's order had arrived. To support the decisive battle and destroy Leon, Patton had stripped his rear defenses bare. Watching the guards depart and the supply depot left wide open and unguarded, I rose from the mud. I slowly donned my silver helmet. Click! The visor dropped, concealing my cold, grim expression. My silver eyes burned in the darkness, my killing intent freezing into ice. "Father, your task is done," I declared, drawing my sword as crimson flames ignited along the blade. I turned to my 3,000 eager black cavalry. "Brothers, the prey has exposed its neck. It's our turn. Charge!" The night was deep, and the rain poured down like a deluge. The roar of the rain drowned out the rushing Black River and the thunder. Black River Ferry, the Medici family's vital supply artery, was on high alert. The commander had fortified the bridge and main roads but ignored the rear, a sheer, slippery cliff face dropping into the freezing, turbulent Black River. To any mortal, it was an impassable chasm. Apparently, the commander had never met a warg with a death wish and a lack of common sense. But tonight, the invaders were not human. A hideous warg head broke the surface of the river, silent beneath the rain. It shook off the water, its glowing green eyes hungering for the hunt. Wolfgang, bare-chested with iron-hard muscles, rode atop the massive warg leader. Rain slicked his bronze skin, but his eyes burned with wild fire. He signaled silently, "Advance." The warg leader growled, its hooked claws digging deep into the wet rock. These monsters from the northern ice plains possessed terrifying stamina and explosive power. Like ghost geckos, they scaled the vertical cliff, carrying the elite Obsidian Territory soldiers with ease. At the cliff top, Southern sentries huddled under a rock, roasting a fire. "Damn this weather," one complained. "The front lines are where the gold is, while we're stuck here in the middle of nowhere." Another veteran sipped cheap liquor. "Stop whining. At least we're alive. Splendor Fortress is a meat grinder. Gold is useless if you're dead." "True. Once those western savages are wiped out, we'll get our share." A cold wind flickered the fire. The veteran's eyes suddenly dilated. Behind his companion, ghostly shadows had emerged from the empty cliff edge. Slash. Before they could react, claws slit their throats. Blood sprayed, extinguishing the fire. Wolfgang stepped from the dark and gestured. Wolf cavalry dragged the bodies away, leaving no trace. The perimeter was breached. A woo! Wolfgang stood at the cliff edge and let out a piercing, desolate howl that cut through the rain. Whoosh! Pop! A red magic signal flare exploded in the dark sky like a bloody flower. The gate was open. In the nearby forest, I opened my eyes, silver irises boiling with intent. I drew my silver sword. Charge! 3,000 heavy cavalry surged from the forest like a black landslide. Their thunderous hooves trampled the wet grass as they slammed into the camp. Crash! The wooden barricades shattered like toothpicks before the iron torrent. Enemy attack. The alarm finally rang out. Carl Beck, the commander, was sleeping with 2 women when the alarm blared. I suppose he was hoping for a different kind of wake-up call. He scrambled out of his tent, half-dressed and sword in hand. The sight before him made his scalp crawl. The camp was chaos. Black cavalry were carving through his men. Flames licked the rain-soaked tents. "Hold the line," Carl screamed, knowing the loss of the ferry meant the end of Splendor Fortress and himself. 10 gold coins for every kill. 20. Anyone who flees dies. His desperation was futile. The garrison consisted of second-rate mercenaries and laborers, not the elite Violet Legion already sent to the front. 20 gold coins. Not if I'm dead. A mercenary threw his spear and fled. Southern soldiers wore heavy plate armor, effective in open formation. But in the muddy, chaotic night, the armor became a death trap. A knight slipped in the mud and was trampled by a warhorse, his chest crushed. The Western soldiers, however, wore armor improved by Master Glenn, flexible, jointed, and slip-resistant. They moved like a meat grinder. For the West, a veteran roared, shattering a mercenary's shield. The mercenary's morale shattered. Greed could not overcome the fear of death. As the camp collapsed, a silver flash cut through the rain. I rode toward the command post. I cut down the guards without slowing my pace. I stopped 5 meters from Carl, mud splashing the Count's son. I pointed my sword at Karl's throat. Stay back. Karl trembled, his sword shaking. I am Karl Beck. My father is a southern count. I am kin to the Medici family. Karl babbled, desperate to trade his status for his life. Don't kill me. I have money. The Medici family will pay your ransom. 10,000, 50,000, double. They'll pay double. It was his final card, the belief that everything, even life, had a price. I looked at the cowering noble with a mocking sneer. Ransom, I repeated softly. It's charming how he thinks his life is worth more than the mud on my boots. To Robert and the southern nobles, war was merely a business transaction measurable in gold. They failed to grasp that some things, like the souls lost in the Valley of Winds or dignity itself, were priceless. My apologies, Count Karl, I said through the rain. The West needs no ransom. We only need victory. With a flash of steel, I swung my blade. Karl reflexively raised his sword to block. My blade, reinforced with battle chi, shattered the Count's gem-encrusted, priceless sword as if it were glass. The sword continued its arc, slicing across Karl's neck. The head, still shouting double, mid-sentence, flew into the muddy water. The headless corpse collapsed in a spray of blood. The enemy commander is dead, I roared, hoisting the head. Surrender and live. With their commander dead, the thousands of southern soldiers and mercenaries lost all will to fight. Weapons clattered to the ground as countless men knelt in the mud, trembling. The battle ended before dawn, far more swiftly than I had anticipated. As the rain ceased and dawn broke, I surveyed the spoils. The Medici family was staggeringly wealthy. The ferry's warehouse was packed with grain, steel arrows, barrels of oil, and vast quantities of armor and weapons. These supplies, intended for the siege of Splendor Fortress against Leon, were now mine. The adjutant stared at the bounty, swallowing hard. My lord, if we could transport this to the west, we could arm 20,000 men and cover our military expenses for half a year. The adjutant urged. We must find ships or wagons to move this immediately. The soldiers, accustomed to poverty, looked on with hungry eyes. I, however, remained silent, my gaze fixed toward the distant Splendor Fortress. I envisioned my father, Marquis Leon, leading 30,000 men in a bloody struggle, buying me time with their lives. There is no time, I said, my voice cold. With only 3,000 cavalry, we cannot move this much weight quickly. If Patton turns back or nearby garrisons intercept us, all our efforts will be for nothing. We cannot take it with us. I took a breath, making a painful but necessary decision. I pointed my sword at the mountain of wealth. Burn it. What? The adjutant gasped. My lord, this is worth hundreds of thousands of gold coins. Burn it, I commanded sharply. We cannot take it, and we cannot leave it for the enemy. Robert loves to flaunt his wealth. Let him see what his gold looks like when it burns. The soldiers obeyed, dousing the supplies in oil and setting them ablaze. A massive fire erupted, a red dragon consuming the Black River ferry. Millions of gold coins worth of wealth turned to ash. It's amazing how quickly a fortune can become a very expensive bonfire. The inferno lit the sky, visible even from the distant Splendor Fortress. I watched the flames. Patton, your supplies are gone. Now, it is your turn to despair. At the command tower of Splendor Fortress, the battle outside raged on, but the mood inside remained optimistic. Robert stood before the sand table, watching the Western flags being repelled, and smirked. Old man Leon has gone mad, Robert said, sipping hot red wine. He's bleeding the West dry just to paint my walls. In 3 days, his army will be dead, and the Queen of the West will be a toothless lion. Patton nodded in agreement. As long as the supplies from the ferry keep coming, this fortress is impregnable. Supplies? Robert laughed confidently. I've already sent word. The next shipment of oil arrives tomorrow. Bang! The doors burst open. A scout, covered in soot and smoke, stumbled in. He collapsed, reeking of burnt flesh. Marshal, the scout rasped. It's over. Black River Ferry has fallen. Robert's crystal goblet shattered on the floor. His smile froze, replaced by a look of shock. What did you say? The scout sobbed. Eli Pendragon. He raided the ferry last night. Count Karl is dead. The garrison is wiped out. And that madman burned all the supplies. Grain, weapons, oil, all gone. Everything is ash. Robert felt his world shatter. He feared not just the tactical reversal, but the reaction of his father, Harksun Medici. Robert's face turned deathly pale. Without food, the 20,000 elite troops and thousands of laborers in the fortress were now just mouths to feed. Gold could not be eaten. Without grain, his army would devolve into a starving mob. Eli! Robert roared, smashing the sand table. I will kill you. We've been played. Patton realized the truth faster. He rushed to the window, watching Leon's desperate assault on the walls, his teeth grinding. A diversion. It was all a diversion. Patton's eyes bloodshot with rage. These madmen, they sacrificed 30,000 lives just to buy time for that strike force. Leon Black, are you so desperate to win that you'd throw your life away? The reality was grim. The logistics of the Iron Triangle had collapsed, leaving the fortress and Red Maple Fortress isolated. Marshal, what now? Patton asked urgently. Should we split our forces to retake the river? Retake it. Robert laughed bitterly. With what? The supplies are gone. There's nothing left but ruins. A black hawk landed on the table, carrying an urgent message from the royal capital. Robert opened the scroll, his hands trembling. It contained only his father Harksun's cold, emotionless handwriting. Fool. Abandon the minor to save the major. Consolidate forces. Hold Splendor Fortress at all costs. Harksun knew the Iron Triangle was broken. Splitting forces now would lead to total defeat. Their only hope was to retreat into the shell of Splendor Fortress and await rescue. Order the garrison at Red Maple Fortress to abandon their post and retreat to Splendor, Robert said, looking 10 years older. We hold the line. Meanwhile, at Red Maple Fortress, panic was spreading. I stood upstream, watching the river, and smirked. Killing doesn't always require a blade. I waved my hand. Release. Soldiers pushed massive wooden rafts into the water. The rafts were adorned with captured Southern flags and the corpses of Southern officers, drifting downstream as a grim omen. Blood-red signs floated down the river, chilling the onlookers. Black River has fallen, supplies destroyed. Robert has abandoned you. Gold cannot buy life. Surrender and live. These planks drifted downstream toward the moat of Red Maple Fortress. A mercenary spotted the debris, sparking panic. Black River is finished, they cried. Even Carl is dead. Robert has abandoned us, and the supplies are gone. Why should we fight? The Red Maple Garrison, a band of mercenaries driven solely by profit, lacked all loyalty. With their retreat cut off, supplies gone, and their employer missing, their resolve vanished. Seeing the corpses and signs from upstream, the soldiers' morale collapsed completely. Fear spread like a virus. Mercenaries rioted, attacking the provost's squad to loot valuables. Amid the chaos, the blare of trumpets signaled an assault. Marquis Fryclaire's 10,000 Western Light Cavalry appeared like patient wolves. This time, it was no feint. The Marquis roared. Black River has fallen. Splendor Fortress is surrounded. You are an isolated island. Lord Lucius orders, surrender within 1 incense sticks time for amnesty, or face total annihilation. The threat broke them. I surrender. Don't kill me, the mercenaries cried. The garrison commander sighed in despair, seeing his men drop their weapons. Open the gates, he surrendered. The drawbridge fell, and the fortress surrendered without a fight. My psychological warfare and the western border's pressure had conquered the fortress bloodlessly. It had only been 3 days. Honestly, I've had longer weekends. The Medici family's impenetrable Iron Triangle defense crumbled under my raids and psychological strikes. 2 fortresses fell, and the supply hub was destroyed. I and my Obsidian Territory Iron Cavalry appeared on the flank of Splendor Fortress with their captives. The situation reversed. Robert's plan to drain the West had backfired. Now 50,000 Western troops surrounded Splendor Fortress, sealing it off completely. On the ramparts, Robert stared at the endless Western camp and the Black Dragon flag, his face ashen. His gold was now useless. His golden fortress had become a golden cage. It turns out you really can't eat coins, no matter how shiny they are. The Western camp, like a black beast, locked the fortress in a tight grip. Under a gloomy sky, the relentless thunder of catapults became the rhythm of the siege. Massive stones hammered the fortress walls incessantly. While the walls held, The physical damage was not yet fatal. However, every impact felt like a death knell to those inside. The fanatical atmosphere was replaced by suffocating panic. The destruction of the Black River Ferry began to take its toll. While the fortress had enough grain for 2 months for the army, the population was far larger. Thousands of laborers, merchants, and servants were trapped inside. With the supply line severed, these people became starving mouths. The southern nobles and mercenaries, accustomed to luxury, grew furious at the declining rations. Black bread and salt soup again. A mercenary captain flipped a table, cursing the quartermaster. "I'm here to fight, not to beg. Where is the roast chicken and wine we were promised?" The sweating quartermaster pleaded. "The supplies are gone. The marshal has ordered rationing." "To hell with rationing." The captain kicked him. "I have gold. Bring me wine." But the quartermaster could provide nothing. In this besieged cage, gold had lost its power. Robert stood alone in his underground vault, surrounded by mountains of gold. He let the coins slip through his fingers, the sound once sweet, now mocking. "Useless," he whispered, despairing. He possessed the world's wealth, yet couldn't buy a single cart of grain. Outside, the western camp was filled with the aroma of a feast. Choosing to break their spirits rather than storm the walls, ordered a banquet. Slaughter the livestock. Roast them right in front of the enemy. Eat up. Let the wind carry the scent to them. The soldiers cheered. The smell of roasting meat drifted over the walls. To the starving mercenaries, it was a cruel torture. They watched from the ramparts, salivating as the Western troops feasted. I wasn't finished. Apparently, I have a flair for culinary psychological warfare. Soldiers shouted terms, and archers fired letters into the city. The message was simple: surrender for 100 gold coins and travel money. Kill your officers for 1,000. Resist, and lose everything when the city falls. The temptation was lethal to the profit-driven mercenaries. If the city falls, we lose everything we earned. Why die for Robert when we're starving? The cracks in their loyalty widened. Inside the command tower, Robert heard the laughter and the smell of meat, and his sanity snapped. Fear consumed his reason. He refused to die in this tomb. "Summon my confidants," he commanded. Robert ordered his confidants to the secret chamber, his eyes burning with frantic madness. "This war is lost," he whispered urgently. "I am a madman. I'm trapping us here. We can't just wait to die." Robert pointed to a floorboard in the corner of the room. "There's a secret escape tunnel here, built with the castle, known only to a few. We leave tonight. Take only the most valuable gems and portable notes. Leave everything else." A confidant hesitated. "But sir, what of the army? General Patton is still on the walls." "Forget them," Robert roared hysterically. "Patton can play the hero if he wants. We're heading to the royal capital. That's where my future lies." It was a cowardly abandonment of his troops. His confidants, driven by survival, nodded in grim agreement. As they gathered their loot, the door burst open. Patton strode in, armored and furious, his guards securing the room. Robert dropped his bag of gems, stammering. "Uncle, why are you here? Shouldn't you be at the front?" Patton retorted. "If I weren't here, who would stop my marshal from vanishing?" Patton looked at his nephew with profound disappointment. He stepped forward, his killing intent forcing the confidants back. "Robert, are you running away?" "It's a strategic withdrawal." Robert blustered. "I must return to the capital to lead." "Lies." Patton drew his sword, pointing it at Robert's throat. "You are the marshal. If you flee, it's not a withdrawal, it's a rout. Your men are bleeding on the walls while you crawl through a dog hole." Patton's chest heaved with rage. "The Medici family has never produced a coward like you. You are destroying the very foundation of our house." Robert, unashamed, erupted into hysterical madness. "Foundation? What good is a foundation if I'm dead?" Robert shoved the table aside, screaming, "Uncle, I am the future head of the family. I am your liege. My life is worth 10,000 of these peasants. If I live, the Medici have hope. If I die, their sacrifice is meaningless. Are you rebelling? Move aside." Patton felt only sorrow. He lowered his sword, exhausted. "I won't kill you, but I won't let you ruin this." He ordered his guards. "The marshal is suffering from exhaustion. Lock him in the top tower room. No one is to see him." "You dare imprison me?" Robert shrieked. Clearly, The future head of the family hadn't considered that his uncle was the one holding the sword. Guards dragged the struggling, cursing Robert away. From now on, Patton told the trembling confidants, I command the defense of Splendor Fortress. Mention retreat again, and I'll hang your heads from the flagpoles. Patton underestimated how quickly word would spread, which is a bold strategy for a man who clearly hasn't spent much time around gossiping soldiers. Within an hour, the news of Robert's attempted flight and imprisonment swept through the fortress. The marshal tried to run. He left us as cannon fodder. The news shattered the already wavering morale. Riots broke out that night as soldiers demanded their pay and a way home. Mercenaries, fueled by rage and despair, turned against their commanders. They abandoned their posts to loot the warehouses for food and gold. Take it. It's what the Medici owe us. Chaos spread. Fires and slaughter engulfed the inner city, drowning out the sounds of the Western Border Army outside. Patton fought to restore order, executing ringleaders and displaying their bodies as a warning. Get back to your posts, he roared, blood-soaked. But he couldn't suppress the collapse of their spirits. Trust was gone. The army was effectively dead the moment they realized their leader was a coward. Splendor Fortress, once seemingly impregnable, crumbled from within, consumed by greed and fear before the Western Border Army even attacked. The night at Splendor Fortress felt endless. The fortress, once a bastion of strength, now reeked of rot and despair. Though the walls stood tall, the hearts of the men within had turned to mush. The mercenaries remained silent under Patton's iron fist, but the tension was suffocating. Everyone eyed their neighbors and officers with cold, greedy suspicion. They were calculating the value of a head as a bargaining chip for the Western Border Army. 3 nights later, I, Leon, and Marcus met in the Western camp. Is it confirmed? I asked, pointing a dagger at the fortress's side gate. Marcus nodded. Yes, by the leader of the Black Viper mercenaries, a man named Barren. He's a mercenary who only cares for coin. His messenger brought a signed letter. Marcus produced a crumpled piece of parchment. His terms: protect his assets, grant him a hereditary barony, and pay 50,000 gold coins, and he will open the side gate before dawn. A barony? 50,000 gold. Toscana sneered. Greedy. Leon replied. If it saves our men, it's a bargain. I nodded. Accept it. Tell Barren he gets the title in gold, and if he performs well, a fief. But if he plays us, my eyes flashed. He will regret being born. How do we signal? 3 owl hoots outside the side gate at 3 a.m., Marcus replied. I've assigned an old veteran, Old Blindy, to do it. His mimicry is perfect. Leon stood, drawing his sword. Order the troops to move out. The side gate, a neglected waste disposal route, was now heavily guarded by the Black Viper mercenaries under Patton's orders. Barren stood in the shadows, sweating. He was betting everything that Robert was finished and the Western Border was the future. Boss, a confidant whispered, the Provo squad is watching us. A unit of purple-armored Southern soldiers, the Violet Provo squad, stood guard, watching the mercenaries with suspicion. Barren touched his dagger. If we're going to betray them, we do it right. Use the guards as our offering. Just then, 3 sharp, mournful owl hoots echoed from the woods. Barren shivered. It was time. He put on a sycophantic smile, grabbed several bottles of wine, and approached the Provo squad. Brothers, you've had a hard shift. Have some hot wine to warm up. The Provo captain kept his hand on his sword, wary. Halt. The general has forbidden alcohol during wartime. Just a sip to warm up, Barren said, stepping close to the captain. As they stood within a meter, the captain prepared to scold him, but a flash of cold light struck. Barren's dagger pierced the captain's jaw, driving straight into his brain. Attack! At Barren's shout, the prepared mercenaries erupted. Kill! It was an assassination, not a battle. Dozens of unsuspecting Provo squad soldiers were cut down in seconds, unable to sound an alarm. Lower the drawbridge. Open the gates. Barren kicked the corpse aside. The rusty winch groaned as the heavy bridge crashed down. As the side gate opened, countless wolf-like eyes glowed in the darkness outside. Kill! Marquis Leon Black led his eager Western Border soldiers, flooding into the fortress like a broken dam. The Western Army is in. We surrender. Barren and his men dropped their weapons, kneeling and shouting their surrender. Ignoring the traitors, Leon ordered, "Leave a squad to watch them. The rest, follow me. Take the walls and the armory. Charge." The cries echoed through Splendor Fortress. It was a one-sided urban battle. News of the Western Army's entry shattered the morale of the Southern Territory defenders. Conscripted peasants fled, and the gold-seeking mercenaries chose to cut their losses. They discarded their weapons in organized groups, kneeling and shouting for mercy. To prove their sincerity to the Westerners, they even attacked those who resisted. "Don't kill me. I was forced. I report him. That's a centurion." The streets were filled with kneeling figures and discarded purple flags. The once mighty Splendor Fortress was exposed as a weak, pathetic facade. Yet, amidst the rout, one stubborn stone stood against the western tide. In the inner fortress square, the path to the command tower, stood Patton Medici. Unlike his nephew or the mercenaries, the iron-blooded general refused to flee or surrender. Clad in blood-stained violet mithril armor and wielding the violet thorn, he stood alone on horseback. Behind him were 1,000 loyalists of the Violet Legion, raised by the Medici family. They knew death was certain, but none retreated. With cold, resolute eyes, they held their spears in a steel defensive line. "Form up." Patton's voice remained powerful despite his hoarseness. "I suppose when you're about to die, you might as well project." Watching the black wave and the black dragon flag approach, he offered a grim smile. "The Medici family has no cowards. At least, I am not one." I rode out on my steed, stopping the Western Army. I looked at the old general with a flicker of respect. A worthy opponent. "General Patton," I said calmly, "the tide has turned. Robert is finished. Why die for a doomed family? Surrender. I guarantee your safety and dignity." Patton shook his head, laughing bitterly. "You don't understand, Western boy. I am a dog of the Medici, fed by them my whole life. If the master's house collapses and the dog runs, how could I face my old lord in the afterlife?" He pointed his sword at me. "Come, let me see the strength of the Western war god." I drew my silver sword. "If that is your choice." I turned to the Black Raven Knights. "Draw swords. Send General Patton on his way." 500 knights drew their blades. "Charge." 2 cavalry forces, black and purple, clashed in a brutal, final collision. Horses fell and blood sprayed. It was raw, unadorned slaughter. Patton fought like a mad tiger, switching to a spear when his sword broke, continuing on foot when his horse fell. Pierced by arrows and broken spears, his armor soaked in blood, he continued to roar and strike until, squelch, Buck's heavy sword split his armor, and my blade pierced his heart. Patton froze, looking at the sword, then at me. He bled from his mouth, smiling in relief. Good swordplay. He collapsed onto a tattered Medici banner, the last shred of honor for a rotting house. With his death, the 1,000 loyalists were wiped out. I saluted the corpse. "Give him a proper burial." I then turned toward the command tower. In the underground vault, Robert huddled amidst piles of gold like a frightened quail. His marshal's uniform was wrinkled, his hair a mess. Clenching a dagger, he stared at the iron door, trembling. He knew Patton was dead. He felt no grief, only endless terror. Boom! The vault door was violently blasted open. Wolfgang, a shirtless, beast-like giant, stepped in. He grinned, showing his fangs. "Found you, little rat." Robert shrieked, waving his dagger, but he was no match for Wolfgang. Wolfgang swatted the dagger away and grabbed Robert by the collar, lifting him like a chicken. Honestly, the man had the survival instincts of a particularly dim-witted poultry bird. "Let me go? I am a marshal. The Duke's son." Robert struggled, but Wolfgang dragged him out. In the square, Wolfgang threw Robert at my feet like trash. Seeing my eyes and the surrounding soldiers, Robert's mental defenses shattered. He knelt, trembling, reaching out like a desperate merchant. "Don't kill me," Robert wailed. "I can give you money. So much money. The treasure in this city is yours. I have more in the south. My father will pay a ransom. 50,000 gold. No, 1,000,000. 2,000,000. Robert clutched my boots, begging. "Name your price. Just don't kill me." I looked down at the pathetic viper, who once thought he could buy the kingdom. Apparently, his inflation rate was as inflated as his ego. With deep disdain, I kicked Robert's hand away. "Robert, do you still not understand?" I pointed to my scarred soldiers, Patton's corpse, and the smoking battlefield. Some things cannot be bought with gold. Dignity. The blood shed by the West. I turned away. Bind this marshal like a common prisoner. Put him in a cage. Parade him through the streets. Let everyone see the true face of the Medici family. No, I am a noble. I have immunity. Robert screamed as soldiers bound him with rough rope and dragged him away like a pig. As the cage cart rolled away, everyone knew the myth of the invincible Medici had been shattered. In the royal capital Orlandia, once a bustling city, a suffocating silence reigned. Before the morning mist cleared, a messenger with 3 black feathers on his back broke the dawn's peace. News of the disaster spread like a plague, piercing the walls of every mansion and reaching the ears of the elite. Splendor Fortress had fallen, and General Patton, the military pillar of the Medici family, was dead. Marshal Robert Medici, once hailed as the savior of the royal capital, had been captured and was being held like livestock in a western border prison wagon. Panic erupted, tearing through the city streets like a wild beast. A mob of pale-faced nobles and merchants swarmed the gilded gates of the Medici Chamber of Commerce, waving their promissory notes. Abandoning all decorum, they shoved and roared, desperate to exchange their paper for gold. Exchange. Give me my money back. The bank run had begun. The once revered Medici Chamber of Commerce was now seen as a sinking ship. Yet, the doors remained firmly shut. The usual smiling clerks were gone, replaced by the emotionless, blade-wielding iron vault guard. They stood on the steps, their cold gazes warning the crowd that any step across the line would be met with slaughter. Deep within the Sun Palace, Duke Harksun Medici sat alone by the fireplace, the atmosphere deathly quiet. The fire roared, but the Duke's wrinkled face remained cold. Before him sat a tray containing no ransom note, nor the head of his son. It held only a lock of Robert's golden hair and his blood-stained family emerald ring. Sent by Lucius of the West, this was a test. It was a probe to see how much the Medici patriarch would pay for his only heir. Prime Minister Ryan Graham stood by, feeling a chill of sympathy. My Duke, Ryan hesitated before urging, Marshal Robert is your eldest son and heir. Since they kept him alive, there is room for negotiation. If we pay the ransom. Ransom? Harksun looked up, his murky eyes devoid of any paternal grief or anxiety. He viewed the situation with cold, calculating detachment. He picked up the ring, examining it in the firelight. Ryan, you are old and confused, he said calmly. Robert is finished. A defeated heir who has disgraced himself before the enemy is no longer an asset to the Medici family. He is a liability, Harksun declared with chilling rationality. It's comforting to know my inheritance is being managed by a man who treats his own children like bad stocks. To pay a fortune to bring him back would only make us a laughingstock. What use is a man who has lost his spirit and dignity? Should he lead the family, or hide in a corner as a parasite, a constant reminder of our failure? Prime Minister Ryan felt a deep chill. This was Harksun, the commercial emperor who toyed with the kingdom. To him, blood ties were merely quantifiable chips. If their value hit 0 or negative, they were discarded without hesitation. But if we don't save him? Harksun sneered, grabbing the lock of hair. The Medici family needs no cowards, nor surrendered marshals. To Ryan's shock, Harksun tossed the hair into the fireplace. It vanished into ash. Tell the Western envoy, Harksun said, standing up. The Medici have only fallen heroes, not living captives. Do what you will with him. As of today, Robert no longer exists. The sentence was passed, the bond was severed. Having discarded the liability, Harksun moved with ruthless efficiency. It's amazing how quickly a man can prune his family tree when he's holding the shears. Summon the butler, he commanded. Send a griffin messenger to the Eastern Territory. Recall my youngest son, Lorenzo. Tell him the family needs him. He is now the first heir. I want his investiture ceremony held in the capital within 3 days. This move was designed to fill the power vacuum and stabilize the wavering military. He would use a fresh, hopeful successor to prove the Medici were not finished. As for Robert, he was already history. Harksun turned to the massive military map, his gaze fixed on the satellite towns surrounding the capital. With Splendor Fortress gone, my army could arrive at any moment. Since the capital is an island, Harksun said with a cruel glint in his eyes, let us make it absolute. Initiate the scorched earth plan. Abandon all outer towns and villages. Force every resource, grain, iron, medicine, into Orlandia. Burn what cannot be moved. Destroy the wells and fields. I want 100-mile radius of wasteland outside the capital where not even a mouse can find food. It was the ultimate scorched earth policy. Apparently, Harksun's interior decorator was a fan of the post-apocalyptic chic look. He would turn the city of millions into a fortified bastion capable of holding out for years. But my duke, a civil official asked tremulously, if we move everyone in, the population will explode. We cannot feed them all. And the city is already full of refugees. Who said we are feeding them? Harksun looked at the official with terrifying calm. The capital is for the elite and the soldiers. Why keep useless mouths? He opened the window, letting the cold wind whip his silver hair. He pointed to the slums below, issuing an order that would make hell tremble. Cleanse it. Drive all the beggars, the homeless, and the infirm, those who only waste food, out of the city gates. Drive them west, toward the approaching army. The official stood frozen. This was a death sentence for hundreds of thousands. My duke, this will cause a riot. They will die out there. A riot? Then kill them. Harksun said flatly. Death is their fate. It is part of the strategy. Those hundreds of thousands of mouths are a burden and a ticking time bomb inside our walls. But what if we send them to Eli Black, the man who claims to be merciful and just? Faced with hundreds of thousands of starving refugees, will he save them or not? Saving them will drain his logistics and starve his army, paralyzing his advance. Ignoring them will turn his mercy into a joke. It was a poisonous scheme woven from hundreds of thousands of lives. At dusk, the gates of Orlandia opened, and the Iron Vault Guard forced the impoverished masses out of the city at spear point. Countless ragged civilians, the elderly, and the weak were driven out like livestock from the city they had called home their entire lives. No, this is my home. My son is still inside. Please, just a piece of bread. Their cries were met only with whips and blades. Get out. Go west to that Queen and Eli. They have food. The soldiers roared, pushing the desperate crowd into the wilderness. Harksun watched from the battlements. Wrapped in a black fur cloak, Harksun stood motionless, looking down at the struggling masses like ants. The cold wind whipped up dust and wails. He watched the refugee tide, seeing it as a flood destined to crush his enemy. Eli Black, Harksun whispered, his voice dripping with the arrogant mockery of a victor. Don't you fancy yourself a knight? A hero? This gift, these hundreds of thousands of mouths to feed, is yours. Can you handle it? As the last refugee was pushed out, the heavy portcullis slammed shut. Orlandia, once a bustling capital, had become a cold, ruthless fortress island dedicated solely to war. Outside the walls, the endless tide of refugees, desperate and starving, stumbled toward the western border army. It was a weapon more terrifying than any army. A human tragedy unfolded on the official road from Splendor Fortress to Orlandia. The howling wind and snow cut like tiny blades into the ragged figures walking the path. It was a refugee column of endless scale. Tens of thousands of displaced poor, beggars, elderly, women, and children trudged through the snow like abandoned sheep. Lacking warm clothing, they wrapped themselves in burlap and hay, leaving bloody footprints on the frozen earth. Mom, I'm hungry. I can't go on. Cries and prayers wove a song of despair. Every few paces, someone collapsed. Those who fell were soon buried by snow, becoming small white mounds, never to rise again. Behind them lay Harksun's cold will. Ahead lay the Western Army. This was the poison pill Harksun had left for me. I've had some terrible gifts in my life, but this one really takes the cake. Accepting them would collapse the army's logistics and deplete their food, causing the Western Army to crumble without a fight. Rejecting them would let them freeze and starve, shattering Lin's reputation for mercy and justice. It was an impossible choice. In the Western Army's command tent, the atmosphere was suffocating. Absolutely not. The logistics officer, a shrewd noble from Thorn City, slammed the ledger before me. Your Majesty, look at these numbers. Our supplies can only sustain 50,000 troops for a month. If we feed these hundreds of thousands, in 3 days, our warehouses will be empty. The soldiers will mutiny from hunger. This is Harksun's trap. Other generals agreed. While they pitied the refugees, they knew the cruelty of war. Drive them away, a captain suggested. Or point them elsewhere. They cannot approach the camp. The tent fell silent. Only I remained, staring at the map. It's amazing how quickly a room full of military geniuses can run out of ideas when the solution involves actual work. I ignored the ledger and the anxious generals, my eyes fixed on the red line representing the refugees. Finally, I turned to Lin, who sat in the main seat. Lin, I said, my voice calm but piercing, are we building a kingdom that belongs to the West? Or one that belongs to Orlando? The tent went dead silent. Lin's blue eyes flashed with realization. If it were a Western kingdom, these refugees were outsiders and burdens to be discarded. But if it were the Orlando kingdom, these were her people. What kind of monarch could wear a crown if they couldn't save their own subjects? I understand. Lin stood, adjusted her cloak, and walked toward the tent exit. Prepare my horse. I am going to see them. When Lin appeared on her white horse, escorted by me and the Black Raven Knights, the refugees fell silent. The wind seemed to stall. They didn't know Lin, but the golden iris flag flying in the wind was etched into every Orlando citizen's soul. Is that the royal flag? The Queen. People began to kneel, creating a sea of bowed heads. Lin dismounted. She didn't mind the mud or the stench of the desperate crowd. She approached a shivering woman holding a child and draped her own cloak over the purple-lipped infant. Your Majesty. The woman trembled, but Lin steadied her. Lin turned to face the hundreds of thousands of fearful, expectant eyes. She didn't use amplification magic, speaking instead with her own voice. I am Lin Aurora. I am your queen. Her voice was thin against the wind, yet crystal clear. I know you are cold, hungry, and discarded like trash. Harksun Medici abandoned you because he sees you as burdens and parasites. Lin's eyes shimmered with tears of rage and compassion. But she took a deep breath and opened her arms, embracing the snow and the suffering. I accept you. You are not burdens or beggars. You are my people. As long as the West has food, you will not starve. As long as the black dragon flag flies, no one will harm you. Come home, my people. The West is your home. The words melted the frozen mountains in their hearts. Long live the Queen. We have a home again. The weeping resumed, but it was no longer a wail of despair. It was a release of gratitude and loyalty to their young queen. Of course, slogans don't fill stomachs. It's a shame. Really, a good chant is much cheaper than grain. I had not intended to use frontline rations to fill this bottomless pit. I was prepared. Orders, I said, my eyes bright. Activate the Thorn emergency transport line. Use all captured southern carriages and our own empty ones to transport these refugees to the rear. Put them to work building roads, clearing land, and mining. Work for food. Also, take the secondary grain seized from Splendor Fortress and make porridge. Thick and hot. This strategy solved the survival issue, eased logistical pressure, and provided a massive labor force. This wasn't a poison pill. It was a gift of population Harksun had handed to the West. 3 days later, on the northern wall of the royal capital, Robert and Harksun watched the sprawling Western Army camp outside, their expressions grim. The Western Border Army did not collapse from hunger as expected. Instead, a chilling scene unfolded before the city gates, just beyond bowshot. Hundreds of refugees from the capital, equipped with tin megaphones, began a relentless, day-and-night lamentation directed at the city walls. They cried out, "Brothers inside. I'm old blind man from East Street. Harksun is a butcher who threw us out to the wolves and burned our homes. Her Majesty saved us with hot porridge and clothes. The Medici family treats us like dirt. Brothers, don't die for them. Open the gates and surrender. Her Majesty promises amnesty." These words, filled with blood and tears, pierced the thick walls and reached every soldier's ears. Most defenders were locals or conscripted farmers whose own families were likely among the refugees outside. Hearing their kin's cries and tales of Harksun's cruelty, the soldiers looked at their gold coins, which could buy everything but dignity, and wavered. Their resolve crumbled. The unity forged by money fractured instantly. Soldiers began looking at the Medici supervision team with hatred and suspicion rather than awe. Harksun stood on the ramparts, his face dark and grim as he listened to the wailing. I had caught the burden Harksun intended to use against me. The young man had sharpened it into a blade, driving it straight into Harksun's heart. Mercy was usually useless on the battlefield, but in Mai and Lin's hands, it had become a weapon sharper than any sword. The power of public sentiment. A biting wind swept over the walls of Orlandia. Though it was dawn, the sky remained dark, as if the sun refused to shine on the cursed city. The cries and insults from below hammered against the defenders' fragile nerves like an invisible tide. "Open the gates. Let us out. Her Majesty is outside." The unrest spread to the city gates. Several wavering officers watched their soldiers whispering and preparing to mutiny. Desperate for a way out, they decided to act. They crept toward the winch, hoping to open the gates and let the Western army in. Just as they touched the winch, a series of shrill whistling sounds pierced the air. Black crossbow bolts tipped with eerie blue light shot from the shadows of the watchtower, instantly piercing the officers' heads and chests. Blood sprayed onto the winch, staining the rusted chains. A squad of knights in dark gold plate armor and faceless masks emerged like ghosts. Without a word, they dragged the corpses to the edge and hung them from the walls with coarse rope, leaving them to swing in the wind as a gruesome warning. The walls fell into a deathly silence. The soldiers, terrified by the cold, machine-like knights, dared not even breathe. Harksun Medici showed no mercy. If he could not win their hearts, he would rule through fear. Deep within the Sun Palace, once a symbol of power, now a gilded cage, young King Aiden huddled on his massive bed, shivering under a silk quilt. His usual attendants were gone, replaced by golden-masked, statue-like guards. Harksun no longer bothered with the pretense of respect. Apparently, politeness wasn't in the budget this quarter. Since Robert's capture and the Western declaration of war, the Boy King's only remaining value was his royal seal. The doors burst open. Harksun entered, leaning on his cane, ignoring the trembling child. He walked to the desk and stamped the royal seal onto a pre-written parchment. "Duke, Duke," Aiden asked with a trembling, tearful voice. "What are you doing?" "I want to see Isabella. I want to go to the Southern Territory." Harksun turned, his eyes cold. "Your Majesty, you are going nowhere. To defend your throne, we need money. Issue the decree. In the name of the king, to resist the rebels, a special war tax is levied. All nobles, merchants, and churches must surrender all surplus grain and gold. Disobedience is treason, punishable by total annihilation." Harksun knew mercenaries only cared for gold. With enough pay, they would kill gods. The Medici treasury was empty, but the capital was full of fat sheep. He would bleed the city dry to fuel his war machine. Chaos erupted as Medici private soldiers began looting house by house. Nobles were dragged from their homes, watching their wealth be carted away. Merchants were tortured until they revealed every hidden cellar of gold. The city wailed, but that sound was soon suppressed by a more terrifying noise. Clack, clack, the rhythmic, heavy sound of metal boots on stone. As the regular army neared collapse, Harksun deployed his true trump card, the Iron Vault Guard. Only 3,000 strong, these warriors were over 2 meters tall, clearly enhanced by special elixirs. Their killing intent surpassed even the northern armies. Clad in mithril-infused heavy plate armor forged by masters, they could withstand direct hits from alchemical ballistae. They wielded heavy, armor-piercing swords. These were high-ranking knights raised by the Medici, brainwashed to be emotionless, pain-resistant killing machines. In their world, only one thing was real: the commands of the Medici head. Take over defense. At the commander's order, the 3,000 guards seized all gates, towers, and strategic points. Regular officers were replaced. Any soldier who complained was beheaded on the spot. On the walls, they mounted heavy sniper crossbows. Shoot anyone within 300 meters of the wall, regardless of status. Whether they were Western soldiers, refugees seeking kin, or citizens trying to flee. If they crossed the red line, the crossbows would fire, and a life would end. Under the Iron Vault Guard's brutal suppression, all noise in the capital vanished, replaced by a suffocating, fearful silence. Orlandia had become an ironclad island of obedience. Outside, I watched the silent city, my brow furrowed. My opponent had changed, and apparently he traded his personality for a factory setting of lethal. If Robert was a venomous snake, the new defender was a cold, impenetrable iron turtle. Robert Medici was brought to the front in a prisoner cart, bound and gagged. He stared at the city, the closed gates, and the iron vault guard who didn't even acknowledge their marshal. "Father, open the gate. It's me, Robert," he sobbed, his face a mess of tears and snot. "I'm your son. You can't abandon me." Only a deathly silence answered him, followed by a warning crossbow bolt that struck the ground by his feet. Robert's spirit shattered, collapsed in the prisoner wagon. He realized he was merely a discarded pawn in his father's game, deemed unworthy of recovery. His breakdown stemmed not just from fear of death, but from the crushing despair of being cold-bloodedly abandoned by his own kin. The Medici family's cruelty was absolute. At the Sun Palace's highest tower, Harksun Medici stood in his black velvet robe, buffeted by the biting wind. The elderly man gripped the railing, gazing down at the silent city and the sprawling western border camps in the distance. His eyes were void of emotion. Behind him stood Prime Minister Rhine, who had been forcibly brought there. Watching the scene below, Rhine trembled. "Duke, can you truly abandon your own son?" "Son." Harksun didn't turn, his voice indifferent. "Rhine, you are too naive. Individual life is insignificant compared to the family's survival. Robert lost. He must pay the price." Harksun gestured toward the Western Army, dismissing them as immature despite their numbers. "I think winning public sentiment wins the world." Harksun sneered at the concept of justice. "Naive. Foolish. Before absolute wealth and force, public sentiment is mere grass, swaying with the wind. Feed them, and they are grateful. Hold a blade to their throats, and they obey." Harksun turned to Rhine, his eyes burning with fanatical, paranoid confidence. "I've sent word to the Southern Territory. Patton is dead, but our roots remain. Mercenary pirate fleets and reinforcements will arrive soon." He stomped the floor. "We have 3 years of grain, the strongest walls, and endless gold. I will drag that god of war to his death beneath these walls. Victory is all that matters. History is written by the victors. Once I hang their corpses from the walls, no one will remember how I won. Only that Medici is king." Rhine stared at the man who had become a devil, feeling a bone-deep chill. This island, this iron mask, it would be the nightmare the western border and the kingdom must face. "I suppose it's nice to have a hobby, even if that hobby is being a total sociopath." Orlandia's walls stood tall, an iron curtain separating life from death. But today, beyond that curtain lay an endless forest of steel. Boom, boom, boom. Heavy war drums thundered across the plains, shaking dust from the ramparts. I sat atop my armored steed, Windchaser, at the vanguard of the central formation. Behind me stood 40,000 fully armed Western troops. The Black Dragon banner and the Golden Lion war flag intertwined, blotting out the midday sun. The collective killing intent of tens of thousands crashed like a black tsunami against the seemingly impregnable capital. Surrounded, I looked at the city with complex emotions. Once, I was an exile cast out by this city, leaving in humiliation. Now, I returned as a conqueror, leading a massive army to its gates. "Lord, all 4 gates are sealed," Buck reported, his voice low and firm. "Not even a fly can escape. This golden fortress is now a pressure cooker." "Then add more fire to the base," I replied coldly. I signaled, and Black Raven Knights pushed a special prisoner wagon to the front. Inside was the former Kingdom Marshal, Robert Medici, now stripped of his elegance, his uniform rags stained with filth. Disheveled and bloodshot, he was gagged and bound like livestock. "Push him forward," I commanded. The wagon stopped 200 meters from the walls, just outside arrow range, but close enough to be seen. I rode alongside the wagon, stepping out alone. It's amazing how much more intimidating a war becomes when you're the one holding the leash. I drew my sword, pointing at the guards, my battle chi amplifying my voice like a bell. "Listen, defenders on the wall. Look at who this is. Your marshal, the eldest son of the Medici family, Robert Medici." My voice dripped with mockery. "He has been abandoned, just like you. Harksun would sacrifice his own son to protect his vault. Will you still bleed for such a heartless family? Open the gates. Surrender, Harksun. In the queen's name, I promise. Only the ringleader shall die. The rest will be spared. The words struck the defenders like a bomb, causing immediate unrest. Morale-depleted soldiers and mercenaries peered over the walls at the pathetic figure in the wagon. Honestly, he looked less like a noble and more like a sack of laundry that had lost a fight with a lawnmower. My God, it really is Marshal Robert. If even he is captured, how can we fight? Has Duke Harksun really abandoned him? If the heir could be discarded, what hope did they have? Robert, gagged, stared desperately at the top of the tower. He was searching for his father. Deep down, Robert clung to a final fantasy, that this was a ruse, that his father would show mercy. Finally, beneath a black velvet flag, Harksun appeared. He stood expressionless, leaning on his cane, looking down. Their eyes met across the distance. Robert struggled, emitting muffled cries for help, tears streaming down his face. Father, save me. I am your son. Harksun watched his son struggling in the mud with zero pity, not even anger. Only disgust, as if looking at trash. Disgraceful, Harksun muttered. He turned to an Iron Vault Guard commander. Shut him up. With arrows, my lord. At that distance. The commander hesitated. Use the siege crossbow, Harksun said, his voice chillingly calm. Aim well. Don't let the Westerners laugh, thinking we can't hit a target. The commander trembled, seeing eyes colder than a devil's behind the golden mask. Yes. A massive siege crossbow on the ramparts was adjusted, the winch groaning under the tension. A 2-meter-long steel bolt was loaded, its sharp tip glinting as it aimed directly at Robert. I sensed the movement. No. I realized Harksun's ruthlessness too late. Dodge, I shouted, jerking my reins to swerve. The massive bolt whistled through the air, crossing the distance in a heartbeat. Squelch. The bolt missed Robert's heart but pierced his thigh, pinning him and the wagon floor deep into the mud. Aoawa. The agony forced the gag from Robert's mouth, and he let out a piercing, blood-curdling scream. Blood sprayed from the prisoner transport, staining it crimson. My eyes turned cold. The arrow didn't kill Robert, but it shattered the last shred of hope held by the Southern soldiers. Silence gripped the walls. The defenders stared at the screaming Robert and the quivering bolt. He would even kill his own son? Is this the Lord you serve? I roared, pointing at the ramparts. This is the benevolence of the Medici family. Do you still expect mercy from him? No dissent remained on the walls. Only despair and terror took root. Harksun's ruthless tactics secured his stance, but cost him the hearts of his men. I waved for the unconscious Robert to be dragged away, then turned my gaze back to the towering fortress. I knew a few words wouldn't make this heavily fortified stronghold surrender. The Iron Vault Guard remained unmoved by Robert's fate. They were emotionless killing machines. Furthermore, the walls of Orlandia were formidable. 30 meters high and wide enough for 4 carriages to pass abreast. They were the result of generations of reinforcement. A direct assault would be too costly. I retreated to my command tent and ordered the engineers to assemble the giant catapults captured at Splendor Fortress, because apparently, my hobby is now collecting heavy artillery. Pound them day and night. If we can't break the walls, we'll break their morale. Also, I lowered my voice to the chief engineer. Start digging tunnels from the downstream side of the moat. I'm going to loosen the ground beneath this old turtle. Night fell, and the western camp glowed with activity. It's amazing how much effort people will put into being a nuisance when they're properly motivated. Giant catapults roared, hurling flaming projectiles into the city. Though mostly ineffective, the deafening explosions denied the defenders any sleep. Inside my tent, the butler Sebastian stood in the shadows. I polished my sword. Even the strongest fortress is fragile from within. Your goal is simple. Kill Harksun, or, I smirked, check on the imprisoned young king. If we control the king at the critical moment, we win half the war. Your safety is paramount. Understood, Sebastian bowed gracefully. As you wish, my lord. His form blurred like ink in water, dissolving into a shadow that slipped through the tent seams and vanished into the night. The siege intensified, catapults roared, tunnels deepened, and assassins stalked. Harksun mobilized his forces as the Iron Vault Guard's blades shimmered in the moonlight. Everyone expected the decisive battle to erupt by dawn. Yet, in the darkest hour before dawn, A frantic shout shattered the camp's tension. A scout captain galloped into the camp, scrambling to my tent. I emerged, sword in hand. What is it? Southern reinforcements? No. The scout pointed at the eastern horizon, trembling. It's the east. The eastern horizon, clouds of dust. A massive army is approaching. At least 40,000. Maybe more. I was stunned. The east? Only one force could emerge from there now. The banners. Did you see them? I demanded. The scout swallowed hard. The silver moon. It's the Russell family's flag. Duke Ferenc Russell, who had been watching from the sidelines, finally revealed his fangs at the most critical moment. All forces, prepare for battle. I immediately halted the siege preparations, shifting my main force to face the east in a defensive formation. By daylight, the massive army was visible, 40,000 Eastern troops in pristine armor. They were a fresh force, boasting the kingdom's strongest magic unit, the Star Mage Corps, and elite heavy infantry. Yet it was strange. They didn't attack or rush the city gates. They halted 10 miles from the capital, 5 miles from the western camp's flank. They set up camp, neither attacking nor retreating. Duke Ferenc Russell remained unseen, but his intent was clear. He sat there like a vulture waiting for the prey to exhaust each other, or a mediator ready to tip the scales. The Oriole. I stood on a ridge, watching the silver moon flag, my grip on my sword turning my knuckles white. A dangerous three-way standoff had formed, the western army besieging, the south trapped, and the east looming. Hark, son, is this the variable you were waiting for? I narrowed my eyes. The final player had entered the game, and he was clearly late for the start. The noon sun could not dispel the gloom over Erlandia. In the silence between the armies, the closed eastern gate of the capital cracked open. The drawbridge lowered, and a procession of 10 heavy carriages emerged, unarmed. They carried no white flag, but held aloft the scepter of negotiation. Led by Harkson's trusted butler, they headed straight for the eastern camp. The western camp grew alert. Buck pointed at the carriages, frowning. Look at the depth of the wheel tracks. Those are heavy. Is that old fox Harkson trying to bribe the Russells? I watched the carriages disappear into the eastern camp, unfazed. Bribes? I chuckled. At this stage, money can't buy allies. Harkson has likely staked everything, perhaps even half the kingdom, as a bargaining chip. What should we do? Should we intercept them? Buck gestured to kill. No, I shook my head. Duke Russell is a smart man, and there is someone there who hates the Medici even more than we do. Let's watch the show. Inside the Eastern Command tent, the atmosphere was solemn. Duke Ferenc Russell sat on his throne, draped in mithril armor. His hawk-like eyes stared coldly at the envoy from the capital. 10 giant mahogany chests were opened in the center. They weren't just gold. They held top-tier jewels, diamonds, magic crystals, and priceless heirlooms. It was the essence of the Medici family's centuries of collection. The butler remained undaunted by the cold stares of the Eastern generals. He presented a gold-threaded contract, his voice booming. Respected Duke Ferenc. A small gift from my master, Duke Harkson. He also offers a contract to split the world. If the East turns against the Western rebels, the Medici family will divide the kingdom at the Black River. The East will have full independence, tax rights, and minting rights. You will no longer be a duke, but the king of the East. True shared royal power. The Eastern generals gasped. Dividing the kingdom. Shared power. It was an offer to carve the Orlando kingdom in two. Compared to the West's vague promises, Harkson's offer was irresistible. Even Duke Ferenc's brow twitched. He studied the contract, weighing the pros and cons. The butler, sensing success, grew bold. Duke, a wise man knows his time. Eli Pendragon is just a wet-behind-the-ears boy, and Queen Lynn is a nobody. What future do they have? I'd argue my future is actually quite bright, mostly because I'm currently holding a very sharp sword. As the steward rambled about the Medici family being a reliable ally, a sharp, clear pluck of a harp string cut him off. The sound echoed through the tent, silencing the steward's speech. A melancholic melody followed. The steward, annoyed, glared toward the source of the music. Behind the screen stood a middle-aged man in a bard's robe, clutching a harp. He looked weathered, but his eyes were piercingly bright. The steward felt a flicker of recognition, but couldn't place the man. Who are you to interrupt the negotiation? The steward barked. The man ignored him, singing softly. The viper nests on the golden mountain, hissing lies. He offers half the world for a sip of poison wine. Poor traveler, you miss the fangs in the grass. By the time you smile in your sleep, the venom has reached your heart. The man stopped playing and offered the steward a gentle, chilling smile. This song is called The Viper's Funeral. I wrote it on the road to the royal capital, watching my fallen companions. The steward's eyes widened, his finger trembling. Chris Russell, you're supposed to be dead. I died once, Chris said, walking toward the chests of jewels. He turned to his brother, Duke Ference, his tone grave. Duke, the mastermind behind our ambush, the one trying to frame the West to ignite a civil war. It was Robert Medici. They treat us like fools, using us as pawns. Now that they're dying, they try to buy our lives with blood-stained gold. Chris kicked over a chest, spilling diamonds like trash. What do they take the Russell family for? Beggars. The steward turned deathly pale. No, it's a misunderstanding. That was Federico. My master said it was a Western plot. Enough, Duke Ference interrupted with cold authority. He stood and faced the steward. Do you take me for a fool? Federico wouldn't dare attack my envoy. Only the arrogant Harksun would spin such a pathetic lie. Ference looked at the jewels with disdain. Take your trash and leave. The Russell family may not be as business-minded as the Medici, but we value our honor. We do not ally with regicides, nor do we trade with schemers who treat us like idiots. Duke, please reconsider. This is half the kingdom, the steward pleaded. Guards, Ference barked. 2 soldiers pinned the steward. War does not kill the messenger, Ference said, drawing his sword and swinging it once. The steward collapsed, clutching his severed ear. This is a return gift for your master, Ference said coldly. Tell Harksun, if he wants the East, he can try in his next life. Throw this filth out. Amidst jeers, the steward was kicked out of the camp like a dog. It's amazing how quickly a high-ranking diplomat can transition into a stray animal. The chests of jewels were dumped in the wilderness to be buried by the snow. Half an hour later, as news of the steward's return spread, the western camp gates opened. I rode out alone, dressed in simple black hunting gear, carrying 2 jars of wine. When the eastern scouts surrounded me, I smiled calmly. I am here to visit Duke Ference for a drink. The scouts, awed by my reputation, let me pass. I entered the tent, met with wary but not hostile gazes. I placed the wine on the table. Obsidian territories, fire burn. It's not fancy, but it's what a man needs in this weather. I opened the jars. Ference watched me, intrigued. You're bold, coming here alone. Aren't you afraid I'll turn you in for a bounty? If you were that kind of man, the steward wouldn't have left with his ear. I joked. I drank a bowl and looked at Ference. I'm not here to trade or make empty promises. I'm here for a man-to-man talk. I know the East doesn't want to bleed for the West. The royal capital is a hard nut to crack. Ference nodded. I pointed to the map. I don't need your soldiers to attack. I need you to do one thing. I pointed to the East Gate and the canal leading to the south. Blockade. Block the East Gate and the waterways to the south. Harksun is a fox. He's preparing an escape route. Cut off his path. Turn him into a rat in a cage. It was a brilliant, low-risk proposal for the East, assuming Ference could actually follow simple instructions. And what do I get? Ference asked. I don't want empty promises. This is from Queen Lin, I replied. Post-war, we recognize your legal control over all currently occupied lands, including the royal territory. Furthermore, I added, we will open trade barriers. Eastern merchants will have full access to the West. Ference was silent, studying the young commander. My proposal was pragmatic, sincere, and hit the mark. It preserved the East's strength, secured land, and opened trade. Good, Ference laughed, raising his bowl. This wine is strong. Deal, Viscount. I guarantee, not even a fish will escape the East from today on. They clinked bowls, sealing the fate of the royal capital with a drink. At dawn, Harksun looked out from the walls in despair. The silver moon flag had moved. The Eastern army had advanced, fortifying the East Gate and the canal. Warships blocked the river, and trebuchets aimed at the water. The West held the other 3 sides. With the silver moon flag planted, the once great Orlandia was sealed. It's over. Harksun's cane clattered to the floor. The Viper's retreat was cut off. Orlandia, once glorious, was now a caged beast letting out a final, desperate roar. Surrounded on all sides, there was no escape. The Russell family's Silver Moon warships blocked the east, while 50,000 Western Border Iron Cavalry surrounded the north, west, and south. With siege towers standing like giants and catapults calibrated, the capital was moments from ruin. Suddenly, I raised my hand, shouting, "Halt!" The catapult crews and heavy infantry froze in their tracks. Every eye turned toward the towering walls of the Sun Palace. Harksun Medici was executing a move that chilled the world. On the windswept ramparts, a small figure was bound to a massive stone pillar. It was the 9-year-old king, Aiden Aurora, dressed in oversized royal robes and the heavy crown of thorns. Beneath him, the ramparts were packed with barrels of alchemical explosives. The fuses were linked. A single spark would incinerate the tower and everyone on it. Harksun, draped in black and leaning on his cane, stood behind the king. His silver hair whipped in the wind as he shrieked through an amplification spell. "Eli Pendragon, don't you claim to be a righteous force, a knight for that usurper Lin?" Harksun grabbed Aiden's hair, forcing the weeping boy to face the army below. "Come on, fire your catapults. Your first stone will blow your own king to pieces. Let's see how you explain this to the world, or how Lin justifies sitting on that throne." The move was venomous. Though Lin was crowned and Aiden labeled a puppet, he remained the late king's blood and Lin's brother. If he were killed by Western catapults, it would be a public execution. The Western border would be forever branded with the sin of regicide and fratricide. This political stain would shatter the loyalty of their recent allies. Marquis Marcus slammed his sword in fury, while my face turned grim. The siege was paralyzed. Aiden, shivering in the cold, sobbed uncontrollably. It's hard to look heroic when you're leaking snot all over the royal robes. He realized that Grandpa Harksun he once trusted was now a cold-blooded captor. He was merely a disposable toy. Sister, save me," he wailed, calling for Lin. He cried out not for Isabella, but for the sister bound to him by blood. His cries echoed across the battlefield, filling the Western soldiers with rage. Harksun slapped the boy, silencing him with a bloodied lip. He turned to his masked iron vault guard, issuing a final order. "If anyone approaches within 300 meters of the wall, enemy or civilian, kill them. If the world no longer belongs to the Medici, I will drag this city and this king to the grave with me." Civilians attempting to flee were immediately cut down by crossbow fire. The capital became a tomb. Deep underground, the air was thick with rot and dampness. Within the labyrinthine sewers of the capital, Bernard, the Minister of Intelligence, huddled in a dry pipe corner. Listening to the explosions above, he frantically sketched on parchment. He knew Harksun had truly lost his mind and intended to kill everyone. If he didn't act, he would die when the city fell or the explosives detonated. "I cannot die. I still have my wealth and my secrets," he muttered, his eyes glinting with desperation. Having overseen the capital's repairs, he knew every secret passage, including those hidden from Harksun. He finished his map, a structural diagram of the new walls with a single red circle. It marked a hidden drainage outlet, the only blind spot in the capital's defenses. He sealed the map in a wax ball and attached it to a trained sewer rat messenger. "Go, find the god of war of the West." He sent the rat into the pipe. It was his ticket to survival. In the Western Command tent, Buck stared at the map. "Bernard? That man is Robert's lapdog. Can we trust him?" "We can," I replied calmly. "Men like him fear death above all else. He'd sell his own mother to survive, let alone a madman like Harksun." I pointed to the red circle. "This leads to the Sun Palace's cellar, bypassing all magical wards. Sebastian, Wolfgang, tonight, we steal the boy back." Late that night, in the capital's underworld, there was only darkness, dampness, and the stench of decay. The sewer network was a vast web of the city's hidden filth. 5 cloaked figures waded through the waist-deep sewage, led by Bernard. The minister held a dim light, his face pale and trembling. He was terrified not just of the filth, but of the killers behind him. We're here." Bernard stopped before a rusted iron door. "Behind this door is the ventilation shaft to the wine cellar, directly beneath the boys' prison." He handed a strange brass key to Sebastian, pleading, "The key, Please, don't kill me. Lord Eli promised. Sebastian took the key with a gloved hand, ignoring the man. His dark red eyes fixed on the door, sensing the defensive barrier. There is a ward against shadow creatures here. The butler whispered, touching the door as golden runes flared. Leave this to me. Sebastian released a thick, acidic darkness from his fingertips onto the barrier's nodes. Corrode. The barrier dissolved with a soft hiss, like melting snow. The impenetrable defense crumbled, fading into glowing motes under the shadow demon's magic. The iron door clicked open. I patted Bernard's shoulder, terrified, and told him to hide, promising safety if he survived until dawn. I drew my silver sword, its blade shimmering with a cold, flameless light. Buck, Sebastian, move out. At the Sun Palace gate tower, King Aiden, bound to a stone pillar, shivered and wept in the biting wind. Four elite iron vault guards in dark gold armor stood like statues, hands on their hilts, ready to kill at the slightest disturbance. A magic lamp flickered. A guard spun around, but he was too slow. A black shadow stretched from his feet, solidifying instantly. A pale hand pierced the guard's throat and neck armor. Sebastian emerged, moving with ghostly elegance through the guards' shadow dance. The remaining 3 guards were frozen as their own shadows shackled their ankles. Sebastian's silver dinner knife precisely sliced through the gaps in their helmets. They collapsed silently. Quick! Sebastian cut Aiden's ropes. Aiden looked up in terror at the gentle old man. Hush, Your Majesty. I'm taking you home. Suddenly, boom. A terrifying surge of battle chi erupted from the command tower. Harksun Medici was awake, and clearly, he wasn't a morning person. The old fox had been lurking nearby, sensing the life force despite the shadows. Assassins! Stop them! Harksun's roar echoed as metal clattered. Dozens of iron vault guards swarmed from the shadows, blocking every exit with heavy weapons. Damn it! Sebastian grabbed Aiden, unable to use Shadow Step while carrying the boy. Go! 2 figures vaulted over the ramparts to intercept the guards. Eli! Aiden cried out. No talk. Take him. I roared, my sword igniting. Flame slash. A crescent of fire swept out, forcing back 5 guards. Roar. Buck, a raging bear in steel gauntlets, unleashed brilliant gold rank battle chi. Get out of my way. Buck slammed his fist into a guard's shield. The high silver rank guard was sent flying, his chest armor caved in. Gold rank. The guards hesitated, but their commander barked, form up. Kill them. 30 guards formed a lethal, coordinated formation, closing in. Sparks flew as weapons clashed. I and Buck faced immense pressure against the heavily armored elite. My blade barely scratched their mithril-infused armor. It's like trying to cut a tank with a butter knife. A stray arrow grazed my cheek. Lord, we can't hold much longer. Buck, bleeding from several wounds, smashed a jaw with a counterpunch. 10 seconds. I roared, Sebastian. I'll buy you 10 seconds. Go. Understood. Sebastian glanced at his master before sprinting toward the wall with Aiden. Stop him. Harksun screamed. As guards moved to pursue, I burned my magic. Sea of fire. A firestorm erupted, forcing the guards back as Sebastian leapt from the wall with the king. A massive shadow caught them, Wolfgang and his warg. Got him. Wolfgang howled. A green signal flare bloomed over the Sun Palace. The king was saved. Queen Lin, watching from the western camp, saw the signal. Her eyes blazed. Attack. Leave none alive. The Western Army's trebuchets roared. Hundreds of flaming boulders rained down on the Sun Palace walls. Without the hostage or the broken magic arrays, the walls groaned under the bombardment. The walls collapsed in a cloud of dust. Charge. 50,000 Western soldiers surged forward under the Black Dragon flag. Street fighting erupted inside. The mercenaries faced the full force of the Western Army. Officers offered gold, but it was useless. Die. A heavy infantryman from Obsidian territory smashed a mercenary with his shield and finished him with an axe. The mercenaries' morale shattered. The Western soldiers, fueled by vengeance and belief, tore through them. Harksun retreated to the main palace with his remaining guards. By dawn, Orlandia was stained red with blood. The fighting subsided. The square was littered with corpses and gold coins, reflecting the morning light. It was a very expensive way to make a mess. Heavy footsteps echoed. My sword notched and dripping, walked over the golden bodies toward the Sun Palace steps. I left a long trail of blood behind me. Buck, Wolfgang, and countless soldiers from the west followed in silence, their collective killing intent palpable. I kicked open the Sun Palace's main doors. The hall was empty save for the corpses of Iron Vault guards. Harksun Medici sat upon the high throne, impeccably dressed in his black robes. He held a glass of red wine, watching me with the calm of a host expecting a late guest rather than a man facing death. "You've arrived," Harksun rasped. I stopped in the center of the hall. Looking at the merchant king who once tried to buy the kingdom, I felt no joy, only the cold indifference of a settled matter. "It's over, Harksun," I said, pointing my sword at the throne. "Your gold cannot save you." Harksun laughed. He stood, adjusted his collar, and spread his arms, surveying the peak of power he had spent his life pursuing. "Indeed, it is over," Harksun mocked, his eyes flashing with madness. "But I, Harksun Medici, only trade. I never submit to judgment. This final outcome, I alone shall decide." He downed his wine. Boom! A violent explosion erupted from beneath the throne, the final alchemical explosives Harksun had planted. Flames engulfed the throne and the mad old man. The Sun Palace began to collapse. I watched the fire consume the family that once sought to rule everything. The Iron Vault fell. A new era began to rise from the ruins. Dawn's light pierced the clouds, casting golden rays over the Sun Palace's white jade plaza. The light revealed only carnage and corpses. The once sacred ground now resembled a slaughterhouse abandoned by the gods. The final line of defense stood atop the 99 steps leading to the main hall. 300 men stood like an insurmountable mountain of steel. I've seen smaller mountains, but they usually don't try to stab me. They wore dark gold plate armor reinforced with mithril, wielding greatswords and axes etched with anti-magic runes. Faceless behind golden masks, these alchemically modified Iron Vault guards knew only duty or death. I, riding atop my steed, arrived before them with 1,000 blood-soaked knights. The two elite forces stood in silent confrontation. No words were exchanged. They were slaves to gold and contracts, bound to fight until the end. I drew my chipped silver sword, which still flickered with faint embers. "Charge!" The command ignited the battlefield. Boom! The 300 guards struck their shields in unison, a thunderous roar of defiance. The black tide of knights crashed into the Golden Dam. It was the most brutal collision in Orlando's history. Mithril against mithril, battle chi against enchantments. Buck roared, his golden battle chi exploding as he slammed into an Iron Vault captain like a raging Kodo beast. Bang! The silver rank captain was sent flying, his chest plate crushed, slamming into a stone pillar while vomiting blood and viscera. But more guards swarmed in, their coordinated anti-magic swords dimming Buck's battle chi and carving deep wounds into his armor. Buck's defenses flickered under the relentless assault. The Black Raven Knights fought with desperate ferocity, using spears, axes, and their own bodies to breach the line. A young knight, run through, held onto the enemy's blade to allow his comrade to strike. Every step forward cost a life. Every stair climbed was paid for in blood. I moved through the fray, my sword claiming a life with every strike. I realized these guards were far more formidable than any previous foe. Apparently, being alchemically modified includes being a massive pain in the neck. Their armor was too thick. Use fire. Aim for the gaps in their masks. I shouted, igniting my blade. After losing 200 knights, Buck finally decapitated the last guard at the hall's entrance. The path to the throne was open. Buck leaned on his greatsword, gasping, his armor slick with blood from a dozen wounds. "Lord, the path is clear." I nodded, patting Buck's shoulder and channeling battle chi to staunch his bleeding. "Wait here," I said, sheathing my sword and straightening my tattered cloak. I stepped over the corpses and pushed open the golden-laid doors. The hall was silent, filled with colorful light from the stained glass windows. Harksun Medici sat upon the golden throne. He remained perfectly groomed, his velvet robes and brooch untouched by the chaos. Gold coins, gems, and contracts littered the base of the throne. Sitting atop his mountain of wealth, Harksun watched me with a glass of wine. There was no fear, no plea, no despair. He looked like a man waiting for an old friend to join a long-planned banquet. "You've arrived," Harksun rasped. I stood 10 paces away, observing the merchant king's stubborn arrogance. "It's over, Harksun. Your guards are dead, your son is captured, and your family is finished." Harksun laughed dismissively. "You are wrong, young man. You won the war, the sword, and the fickle public sentiment." Harksun mocked. "But you cannot defeat human nature. As long as greed and the desire for unearned power exist, the ghost of the Medici will always haunt Orlando. I have lost, but another Medici will rise with more gold to stand here." I frowned. "That is for the future. Your era ends now." I reached for my sword. "Wait," Harksun said, sliding a second glass of wine toward me. "My final offer. This glass is not poisoned, but mine is. Spare me, or rather, spare the Medici's overseas branches." Honestly, the theatrics were becoming a bit much. Beneath this glass is the map and key to our secret overseas vault. It holds half our wealth, enough to buy 10 western borders. Take it and be the richest king, or refuse and we die together. This hall is rigged with explosives. It was a gamble, wealth for survival. I did not move. I ignored the map and the threat of the explosives. I looked into Harksun's eyes, my own gaze clear and reflective. "Harksun," I sighed. "Do you still not understand? I don't want your money. I don't fear death. I only want you dead." Harksun froze. Seeing the lack of desire in my eyes, Harksun realized his final leverage was worthless before this young man. He had lost completely. The light in his eyes vanished. The commercial titan withered into a frail, dying old man. Harksun chuckled self-deprecatingly. Maintaining a nobleman's dignity, he straightened his robes and toasted the void. "Goodbye then." He downed the wine, lethal enough to kill a dragon. The empty glass clattered against the gold coins. Harksun collapsed onto his coveted throne. Blood and wine spilled from his lips, staining the golden armrests and dripping onto the coins below. As the tycoon died atop his gold, the falling glass triggered a mechanism. My expression shifted. "Bad." I sprinted toward the exit as a blur. Apparently, he really did mean the part about the explosives. A deafening explosion erupted beneath the throne. Harksun's final act of madness to bury the palace with him. A massive fireball consumed the throne, the corpse, and the gold. The shockwave and flames swept through the hall. "My lord!" Buck rushed in, shielding me with his great sword and shield. The structure groaned. The Sun Palace's dome collapsed, and stone pillars rained down. The palace became a ruin. I, helped up by Buck, stood amidst the debris. Watching the flames consume the old man's ambition and wealth, I whispered, "It's over." I turned toward the rising sun, ready to build a new order. Morning light pierced the smoke over Orlandia, illuminating the war-torn capital. The Sun Palace, though scarred and partially collapsed, remained standing. Today, it welcomed a new master. Without celebratory cannons, only somber bells rang. A blood-red carpet covered the debris and dried blood, leading from the palace gate to the square. Lynn Aurora, wearing the queen's battle robe and a crown of thorns and gold, appeared. Flanked by me, Lucius, and western border generals, she walked the path to power. Her steady pace mirrored history. Soldiers and awestruck citizens watched, their previous suspicion replaced by submission and anticipation. Lynn entered the side hall where the old monarch was held. 9-year-old Aiden Aurora huddled in a corner on a tattered blanket. His royal robes were filthy, his crown missing. Seeing Lynn and me, the spoiled child broke down. He collapsed in terror. "Sister." "No, your majesty." Aiden knelt, kowtowing frantically. "Don't kill me. I don't want to be king. Take the throne." Robert and Harksun forced me. I did nothing. I just wanted to live. Lynn looked down at her half-brother. Seeing his pathetic state, she felt no joy, only deep sorrow. Was this the king of Orlando? A puppet used by Robert and Harksun? It was hard to believe this was the same kid who'd been ordering executions last week. "Stand up, Aiden," Lynn said coldly. Aiden trembled. Lynn crouched, wiping the dirt from his face. "Sister." Aiden wept. "You aren't at fault. Those who pushed you are," Lynn said. She turned to her commanders. "Strip Aiden Aurora of all royal titles. He is demoted to the Duke of Peace. He is granted the Serene Manor and surrounding lands. He shall live as a duke, provided for life." Aiden's eyes brightened at the promise of survival. Lin's tone turned cold. However, he shall never leave the manor, see guests, or interfere in politics. The LaRoche family will oversee his protection. This compromise preserved royal dignity while preventing any restoration. Take him away, Lin commanded. Attendants led the grateful Aiden away. Lin exhaled. The page was turned. At noon, the central square, where Robert once issued his edict of suppression, became a place of judgment. A new gallows stood, with a disheveled Robert Medici kneeling beneath it. The former kingdom marshal and ambitious dreamer had lost his mind. His legs, shattered by crossbows at Splendor Fortress, left him paralyzed. He clawed at the air, muttering, "I have money, 3 million gold coins. I'll buy my life. I am a marshal." The crowd, especially the refugees he had once abandoned, watched with hatred. "Kill him. He's a devil," they screamed. Debris rained down on him, but he remained lost in his delusions. I stood on the platform, reading the Medici crimes. Silence. Robert Medici, you betrayed the kingdom, murdered Regent Federico, and embezzled the treasury. You abandoned your people and your army. Your crimes are unforgivable. I signaled the executioners. As the rope tightened, the cold reality snapped Robert back to sanity. His eyes cleared. He stopped struggling and looked toward the horizon. He saw the Medici Chamber of Commerce building, the symbol of his family's millennium of glory. "Father," Robert whispered, a tear falling. He regretted his greed and the loveless family he was born into. The trapdoor opened. The former marshal's body jerked and then hung still, swaying in the wind. The Medici era has ended. As the trial concluded, the crowd dispersed. Yet, in a dark corner of the square, a special spectator remained. Bernard, the Minister of Intelligence, a political survivor known for his adaptability, lurked in the shadows. Watching Robert's corpse, his face betrayed a mix of relief at his own survival and greedy anticipation. He straightened his mud-stained but still decent robes and walked toward me. I suppose he wanted to congratulate me on the cleanup, or perhaps he was just checking to see if I'd inherited the bill for the gallows. "Lord Ela," Bernard approached with a fawning, dog-like smile. "Congratulations on eliminating that traitor." I turned, eyeing the clown emerging from the shadows with unconcealed disgust. "It's you, Bernard," I said coldly. "Yes, it is I, my lord." Bernard rubbed his hands, eager to claim credit. "Do you remember? I drew the maps and led you through the sewers. Without me, how could you have captured the false king? Though I served the Medici, my heart was always with the western border and Her Majesty." Bernard's eyes glinted with greed as he finally asked, "My lord, now that the new monarch has ascended, surely the position of Minister of Intelligence." He believed his mastery of the capital's secrets made him indispensable. I smiled. "You're right, Bernard. Your intelligence was useful. Your maps saved lives." Bernard beamed, preparing to kneel, but my tone turned icy. "I promised that if you survived until dawn, I would let you live. I keep my word. But you want to remain Minister of Intelligence?" I grabbed his chin, forcing him to look up. "You aren't worthy. The most disgusting thing in this world isn't an enemy, but a traitor. You betrayed Marquis Khans, Duke Federico, Robert, and Harksun. One day, you would betray me too." I tossed a dagger at Bernard's feet. "Your intelligence was useful, but your tongue is too filthy. It told too many lies and licked too many boots." As Bernard screamed in terror, I ordered the Black Raven Knights to cut out his tongue and exile him to the northern mines for hard labor. The deed was done. By dusk, I stood on the Sun Palace balcony. The thorns were cut, the scepter was in hand, but this was only the beginning. Russell of the East was watching, the North was licking its wounds, and the shattered kingdom awaited repair. "The road is long," I whispered. A warm hand took mine. Lin had arrived. She had shed her heavy armor for a simple dress, appearing not as a distant queen, but as a wife leaning on her husband. "As long as you are here, I am not afraid," Lin said. I held her hand, smiling. "Let's go, Your Majesty. It's time to see our new home." Morning sun bathed Orlandia. Despite the smoke-stained walls and murky moat, the city was waking up. It was emerging from the ruins of war, brimming with newfound vitality. In the Sun Palace, the Great Hall was the center of attention. The main hall, once destroyed by Harksun Medici, had been hastily restored by artisans working day and night. Though the dome remained covered by silk, the grandeur of the first great assembly since the new monarch's ascension remained intact. It was a moment that would decide the kingdom's fate for the next century. Sunlight streamed through the silk, illuminating the red carpet. Queen Lin Aurora sat upon the throne, wearing her signature red and black dress, the crown of thorns upon her head, holding the golden scepter. Her gaze was cold and majestic as she surveyed the court. To her left stood the Western heroes led by Lucius LaRoche. They wore battle-worn gear, their aura of iron and blood commanding awe. To her right were the surviving nobles of the royal territory and envoys from the Russell family of the East. They breathed cautiously, terrified of offending the queen who had ascended over the bodies of her enemies. "Proclaim," the herald announced, beginning the ceremony of rewards. Western Governor Lucius LaRoche stepped forward. Lucius stepped out, his gait steady despite the new gray in his hair, and knelt. "Lord Lucius." Lin looked at the elder who had pushed her to the throne with gratitude. "You planned with wisdom and acted with resolve. You saved the kingdom from the brink of collapse. Effective immediately, you are named protector of the kingdom. Hereditary, ranking above all dukes, overseeing government and the bureaucracy." The hall erupted. Protector of the kingdom, a title above all others, making him the most powerful figure beneath the queen. The LaRoche family was now the true pillar of the kingdom. Lucius bowed deeply. Next, Lin turned to the Eastern envoys. The Russell family of the East, though not directly involved in the fighting, maintained peace in their lands. "I grant you autonomy over the East. All lands east of the Black River are yours. Aside from diplomacy and currency, you shall decide your own military and political affairs." The envoy knelt in joy. This formalization of their previous agreement was a massive political victory. The kingdom had entered an era of East-West division. Lin's voice turned cold as she addressed the final matter. "As for the Medici family of the South, traitors, unworthy of mercy, confiscate all their assets, merchant guilds, mines, and lands. Divide their vast southern territory into 64 independent baronies and viscountcies." I suppose she really wanted to make sure nobody had enough power to start another rebellion anytime soon. "These lands shall be granted to the soldiers who fought in this campaign." This dividing favor decree effectively dismantled the southern threat. The once mighty Medici family was now reduced to dust. The minor factions that had once clung to the Medici were now the target. They would be trapped in endless infighting over those 64 titles, posing no further threat to the throne. "Long live the queen!" The generals cheered. Nothing motivated men like land and titles. Finally, the hall fell silent. All eyes turned to the young man who had remained silent throughout. I was the war's greatest hero, the mastermind behind the Black River raid, the warrior who slew Patton and the queen's husband. Lin rose slowly from her throne. Skipping the herald, she took a golden scroll and descended the dais herself. Approaching me, the world's noise faded. "Eli," she whispered, her voice shedding royal authority for a wife's tenderness. "You saved me, the West, and this nation. Without you, there is no Lin." She unfurled the scroll, announcing clearly, "I name Eli Pendragon the Duke of Dragonfire. I became the royal territory's first non-royal duke and the kingdom's only grand duke with true executive power. My domain would encompass the former Obsidian territory, Spring City, half the Storm Plains, and 300 miles of fertile land west of the royal capital. She granted me the right to establish my own administration, independent military, taxation, and legal system." The hall gasped. It was no mere reward. It was handing me half the kingdom. Apparently, the queen decided that giving me a gold watch just wouldn't cut it. From this day forward, I stood as the Orlando Kingdom's youngest, most powerful, and most expansive feudal lord. A true uncrowned king. Yet, the honors continued as Lin lifted the Guardian Medal, the kingdom's highest military honor, from a tray. She bypassed formal protocol, smiling as she pinned the medal onto my chest and straightened my collar with tender care. She then unbuckled the sword of the king, the symbol of royal authority, and solemnly placed it into my hands. "Protect this realm for me," she commanded. I knelt, kissed her hand, and pledged, "As you wish, my queen." As I rose, Lin shocked the entire court by cupping my face in her hands before thousands of onlookers. The newly crowned queen leaned down and pressed her lips firmly against the new duke's in a bold, public display. I paused in surprise before pulling her close to deepen the kiss, triggering a deafening roar of applause from the crowd. The hall erupted in cheers. The rigid constraints of the past had vanished, signaling the dawn of a new, youthful era. Marquis Leon Black watched his son embrace the queen, his eyes brimming with tears of pride. Wiping his eyes, he smiled, knowing that the Black family, now the Pendragon family, had reached unprecedented heights. They had surpassed their ancestors, becoming the brightest stars on the continent. "Good lad," Leon whispered. As the city celebrated beneath the fireworks, I slipped away to the Sun Palace's highest tower. Overlooking the recovering city of Orlandia, I leaned against the cold railing. "Is it over?" I asked myself, my gaze shifting toward the dark northern horizon. No, it was only beginning. Although the wolf packs of the Northern Territory had retreated, they were merely licking their wounds, poised to strike again. I looked south. The Medici family had fallen, but their exiled remnants and hidden loyalists remained a threat. To the east, the Russell family watched like a predator, and beyond them lay the vast, mysterious cosmos. In this world of magic, dragons, and ancient power, royal power was merely the tip of the iceberg. The system's map revealed vast, fog-shrouded regions still waiting to be explored. Ancient ruins, slumbering magical beasts, and buried secrets awaited. "This is only the beginning," I murmured. I took a deep breath, feeling the fire elemental seed pulsing within me and the surging battle chi in my dantian. My journey was aimed at the stars. As the wind whistled, two figures appeared silently behind me. Buck stood like an iron tower with arms crossed, while Wolfgang crouched on the battlement, his eyes sharp and feral. They stood in silent, steadfast support. "Let's go," I commanded. I turned to my brothers in arms, a carefree smile playing on my lips. "Our destination is still far away," I said, punctuated by a raven's cry. A pitch-black raven cut through the night sky and landed on my shoulder. The bird tilted its head, conveying a distant message. I stroked its silky feathers, my eyes darkening with understanding. "I see," I murmured. "Then let it begin." I took one final look at the royal capital and the queen's still-lit bedchamber. With a sharp flick of my cloak, I vanished into the tower's shadows, leaving behind a silhouette that commanded the continent's awe. The night in Orlandia finally fell silent. The day-long celebration drew to a close as the final firework faded from the sky. Drunken nobles were escorted away by servants, while satisfied citizens returned to their homes. The city drifted into slumber, marked only by the occasional rhythmic tolling of the night watchman's gong. The queen's bedchamber in the Sun Palace, once the domain of the king, had been completely refurbished. The cold gold decorations were replaced with warm, deep red curtains and silk tapestries. "All of you withdraw." Lynn stood before a floor-length mirror, her voice weary yet commanding. "No one is to approach the bedchamber without my orders." "Yes, Your Majesty," the attendants replied. They bowed and retreated, pulling the heavy carved wooden door shut behind them. With a soft click, only Lynn and I remained in the vast chamber. The invisible shackles of being queen finally loosened for Lynn. She exhaled, her shoulders slumping. "Help me, Eli," she said with a wry smile at her husband in the mirror. "This thing is just too heavy." I stepped behind her. I reached for the crown of thorns, the symbol of Orlando's supreme power, which shimmered coldly under the candlelight. It was beautiful but burdensome. I carefully removed the crown, placing it on a velvet tray, followed by her heavy red and black ceremonial gown. Though magnificent, the gown was designed to project authority and provide protection against potential assassination. Its silk layers concealed thin mithril chainmail, while the collar and cuffs were reinforced with dense gold embroidery, stiff as plate armor. I nimbly unfastened the complex hidden clasps. As the gown fell, the layers representing power and defense vanished, stripping away the iron-willed queen who commanded the court by day, though she still looked like she could take someone out with a stray hairpin. In her place stood a weary girl in a white silk slip, fragile and longing for support. Lynn Aurora turned, dropping her facade before the only man in the world with whom she could truly relax. "Hold me," she whispered, her voice tinged with a spoiled, nasal tone. Without a word, I pulled her into a tight embrace. Their bodies pressed together, the thin fabric allowing them to feel each other's heartbeats. "Let's get some air on the balcony," I suggested, kissing her hair. "Okay," she replied. I wrapped Lynn in a thick fur cloak and, arm around her waist, led her out to the massive balcony. The night air was cool, but not biting. From this vantage point, one could overlook all of Orlandia. The capital was dimly lit, its scarred walls appearing desolate under the moonlight, yet a newfound tranquility settled over the city. "Look," I said, pointing to the sleeping city. "This is our city, Lynn. Our kingdom." Lynn leaned into my embrace, gazing out. Once, she was a fugitive princess, hunted and forgotten, afraid to even speak her own name. She had expected to spend her life as a minor noble's wife in a remote corner of the western border. Now, she stood at the pinnacle of power. It felt like a dream, and the man beside her was its architect. "Eli." Lynn turned to look up at me. Moonlight bathed her face, her deep blue eyes shimmering like the stars. "Thank you. If not for you, I would have died that snowy night." I chuckled, flicking her nose. "Do we need thanks between us? Besides, I'm far too expensive to be thanked with mere words." My fingers traced her cheek, down her neck, and rested on her back. Through her silk dress, I felt the faint, raised ridges of old scars. Despite the best healers and expensive ointments, they remained. These were the marks of her many battles and charges across the western wilderness, impossible to fully erase. "Does it still hurt?" I stroked the longest scar. "No," Lynn replied, her hand moving to my face, her eyes burning with sudden intensity. "I only feel heat." Her voice turned husky and seductive. After surviving war and conspiracy, this intimate moment felt precious and intense. Words were unnecessary. My tenderness ignited into passion. I swept Lynn into my arms and carried her to the bedroom, laying her upon the bed as the curtains fell, shielding our privacy. Only stifled gasps, soft moans, and the rhythmic creaking of the bed echoed in the silent chamber. Again and again, it was as if we were purging all our fear, pressure, and longing through this desperate union. Long after, the tide of passion receded. The chamber returned to silence, save for the crackling of the fireplace. Lynn curled into my arms like a lazy cat. Her platinum hair spilled over my bare chest as she unconsciously traced circles over my jagged scar. "Eli." Lynn's voice was soft, tinged with post-coital languor and a sudden, inexplicable sorrow. I kept my eyes closed, enjoying the warmth. Lynn hesitated, stopping her finger. She looked at my chin, her voice barely a whisper. "If we never have children, what will the nobles think?" I stiffened. I opened my eyes to look at my wife. A child was a political knot we could not avoid, a potential death trap. Their regime rested on two pillars: Lynn's legitimate bloodline as the late king's daughter and the military might of the West. Of the two, the bloodline was the foundation of our legal authority. Without an heir, our new dynasty was a castle without a foundation. If Lynn met with an accident or remained childless, the kingdom would collapse. The suppressed old nobles would rise again. Collateral royal relatives would stir, and even the western border might fracture over the succession. Worse, I, as regent, would be branded a usurper in waiting. "Why think of this now?" I asked, pulling her closer, trying to sound light, because nothing kills the mood quite like a constitutional crisis. "We've only been married 6 months, and we've spent most of that at war. It's normal." "But," Lynn bit her lip, her anxiety unassuaged. "We haven't been careful, and my cycle is so regular. It scares me." She buried her face in my chest, sobbing. I asked the court physicians. They said, it might be the cold from my years campaigning in the West, and the times I forced my battle chi to break through bottlenecks. It may have damaged my foundation. As a skilled knight, Lynn's constitution was superior to most. Yet, the overexertion of her body during her formative years had left irreversible damage. In a world obsessed with lineage, a barren queen was seen as fundamentally flawed. "Eli, I'm afraid," she gripped my arm. "I'm afraid of failing my father's bloodline, of not giving you a home, and that the nobles will use this to attack you. Perhaps I should grant you a marriage to a royal relative." Seeing this woman, who faced armies without flinching, now so fragile, I felt my heart ache. I turned, cupping her face firmly. Look at me, Lin. You are the queen, the most powerful woman on this continent. I am your husband, your sword, and your shield. I kissed her forehead. As long as I draw breath and hold a sword, no one will dare question your rule. Stop these thoughts. Your only task is to rest. Leave the rest to me. Lin nodded, calmed by my certainty. Perhaps exhausted, Lin soon fell into a deep sleep. I, however, remained awake. I stared at the ceiling, frowning. I knew her fears were valid. In this feudal era, bloodline was the primary bond of loyalty. It's amazing how much political stability rests on something as chaotic as human biology. If Lin could not conceive, the dynasty's future was doomed to turmoil. I, too, longed for a child of our own. Cold damage, overexerted foundation. I mused. Ordinary medicine might fail, but this was a world of magic and dragons. A name surfaced in my mind. Irene. I made my decision. For the kingdom and for Lin, I would go to the Night Song Forest once things stabilized. Morning light pierced the mist, illuminating the restored dome of the Sun Palace. Though the smoke had cleared, the atmosphere in the royal council chamber remained tense and suffocating. This was the first official council since Queen Lin Aurora's coronation, attended by new favorites and old ministers. On the left sat the Western faction led by Protector of the Kingdom Lucius, armored and imposing. On the right sat the survivors and opportunists from the royal territory and the South. Regarding the post-war pension act, Lucius began, detailing plans for wounded soldiers and reconstruction. Just as he finished, a sudden, jarring wail erupted from the right. Everyone turned in surprise. An elderly man with white hair in a crimson velvet robe was dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. It was Count Nade, a southern noble who had once been a guest of Robert Medici. After the Medici family fell, he was the first to kneel before the Western army. "Your Grace, Your Majesty," he cried. Count Byrne knelt, weeping dramatically. "I worry for the kingdom's future." He glanced between me and Lin, implying that while reconstruction was important, something else took precedence. The royal bloodline is the most critical issue for the nation's survival. The hall buzzed with whispers as old nobles exchanged knowing looks. Rumors of the queen's infertility had been spreading through the capital. Gossip claimed her exile in the harsh West and combat injuries had permanently damaged her ability to conceive. Nade seized the moment. "Your Majesty, your health is suffering from overwork. For the sake of stability and the people's peace of mind," Byrne begged, "I suggest adopting talented children from collateral branches to serve as heirs." He lowered his voice, ensuring everyone heard. "To ensure the bloodline thrives, perhaps consider taking side husbands? After all, Duke Pendragon is only one man." The hall erupted. This was a direct attack on my competence and status. It was a ploy to create factional strife and undermine my influence. I suppose I should be flattered they think I have enough energy for a roster of husbands. Marquis Marcus drew his sword. "Insolent. How dare you discuss the queen's private affairs?" Byrne sobbed. "I speak only out of loyalty." Other nobles chimed in. "I second this." A cardinal from the church stood up. He spoke with feigned compassion. "The count's words are harsh, but intended for the kingdom's longevity. The church believes heirs are a sign of divine grace. Perhaps your Majesty should visit the cathedral for a blessing. We shall perform a baptism to cleanse you of illness and misfortune." The church's intervention was a calculated strike. They were effectively labeling the queen as cursed or sickly. It was a trap. Refusing looked guilty. Accepting confirmed the rumors. Lin sat silently, then turned to me. I gripped her hand tightly. My warmth gave her strength. Lin took a breath. "Enough." Her cold, authoritative voice silenced the hall. She held up our joined hands. "I know what you are thinking. You worry about the succession and your own interests. You want to use adopted heirs to seize power. Cease these dirty schemes. I, Lin Aurora, swear before our ancestors. My only husband is Eli Black. My heir will only be of Pendragon and Aurora blood. If that is not possible," Lin declared, "it is heaven's will. If so, I shall guard this kingdom myself until my final breath. As for what happens after I die, that is for the next generation to worry about." Court dismissed. She swept out, pulling me with her. The ministers were stunned. As they left, Nade tried to slip away. feeling he had successfully tested the queen's resolve. He felt he had struck a blow for the old nobility. "Count." A gentle but chilling voice stopped him. Byrne froze. He turned to see me standing in the shadows with an inscrutable smile. "Duke," Byrne stammered. I approached unarmed. I casually straightened the Count's collar, my fingers brushing the man's carotid artery. It's amazing how quickly people stop acting superior when they realize their pulse is currently in someone else's hands. "Your tie is crooked. Be careful, Count. Meddling in the Queen's private life is more dangerous than treason." Robert Medici thought he had good reasons too. "I hope I don't hear your last words next time." I patted his shoulder and walked away. Byrne collapsed, drenched in cold sweat. He recalled the corpses at Splendor Fortress. He realized the young duke was no mere politician. The rumors were suppressed by fear. That night, in a private chamber, I and Lynn met with a trusted physician. Lady Helen of the Winterbourne family examined the queen. I trusted no one else with this sensitive matter. I watched anxious. Lynn gripped her dress. Helen finally sighed. "Well?" I asked. "Is there an injury?" Helen bowed, looking confused. "Your Majesty is perfectly healthy. Your circulation is excellent, and old wounds have long since healed. As for the cold, your battle chi is more than strong enough to prevent any such affliction." "Why is there no progress?" Lynn asked anxiously. Lady Helen shook her head, troubled. "I don't understand it either. Your pulse suggests you are perfectly capable of conceiving. However, there seems to be an obscure force within you, rejecting it." "Rejecting?" I frowned. "Yes, like a lock," Helen weighed her words. "A lock sealing the gate of life. It isn't a physical injury, but rather a curse," Helen said, ashamed. "My medicine only treats mortal bodies. I am powerless against issues involving bloodlines or magic." The diagnosis left them in a chilling silence. Lynn felt defeated, fearing the LaRoche family curse. I embraced her, dismissing the superstition. If human medicine fails, we will seek more ancient, powerful forces. I thought of the elf princess, Irene. Sun Palace, Royal Council Chamber. The morning sun felt cold as it pierced the Hall of Power. I, the Duke of Dragonfire, had called an emergency meeting. The hall was deathly silent. The usually arrogant nobles now cowered, afraid to look at the man by the throne. I wore black hunting gear, my silver sword at my hip. I stood with hands behind my back, my golden eyes scanning the room like a lone wolf, mostly because I'd forgotten to bring a chair. Beside me, the tower-like buck leaned on a massive greatsword. The weapon served as a terrifying deterrent. "Count Nade," I said calmly. The Count trembled and collapsed to his knees. His face turned paper white, cold sweat dripping onto the carpet. "I hear you've been concerned with the Queen's private affairs." I stepped down, each footfall echoing like a heartbeat. "No, I was foolish. I meant no harm." Nade kowtowed, sobbing. "I am loyal to the Queen and the Duke." "Loyal?" I loomed over the shivering old man. "Is your loyalty shown by gossiping about my wife while I fight for the kingdom? By shaking the foundations of the realm?" I patted Nade's shoulder. The gentle touch terrified the Count more than a blow. "On the battlefield, you'd be a corpse. But here, we follow rules," I declared, my voice booming like thunder. "Hear my decree. Count Nade is stripped of his court advisor title, and his family's southern estates and trade privileges are confiscated. The others who conspired will face pay cuts and house arrest." Nade collapsed in relief, but I signaled Buck. Buck slammed his massive sword into the marble floor. A deafening boom erupted. The stone shattered, the blade sinking a foot deep, vibrating with a menacing hum. "Listen well." I gripped the hilt, my killing intent bared. "I am leaving for the West. If I hear one word of disrespect toward the Queen, or find anyone plotting, this sword, which has cut down the iron vault guards and southern dukes, will wash itself in your blood. Do you understand?" The nobles trembled, answering in unison. They realized the young duke possessed both the strength of a god and the ruthlessness of a tyrant. As long as I lived, the capital would not fall. I headed to the Queen's chambers. Lynn stood by the window in simple attire, watching the city. She turned, her blue eyes filled with deep attachment. "Is it done?" she asked. "Yes," I hugged her. "They'll be quiet for a while." "Must you go?" she whispered. "I must. For our future and the kingdom's." I knew without an heir, Lynn's throne remained unstable. I didn't want her wasting away from worry. Apparently, my primary contribution to the state was currently limited to being a glorified bodyguard. She straightened my cloak, lingering on every detail. Eli, she said, her voice choking. Regardless of the outcome, come back safely. You are more important than any child. If we have no heir, we can adopt. But if you die, she bit her lip, eyes red. I'd rather not be queen. Moved, I kissed her deeply. It was a promise of souls, not just desire. They parted. Don't worry, I smiled. The person who can kill me hasn't been born yet. I'm just visiting the elven forest. I'll be back in a month. I will guard our home, she promised. I met Marquis Leon Black and Buck at the gate. Father, Buck, the capital's defense is in your hands. The Marquis gripped his sword. Go. As long as I draw breath, no one enters the Sun Palace. Buck struck his chest in salute. With them and Lucius in the city, I could leave in peace. I spurred my horse, and it galloped out the gate. Sebastian and a dozen elite Black Raven Knights followed. The small unit left Orlandia under the cover of dusk, heading west. Spring had arrived, melting the ice. The road to the west was no longer a desolate path of bandits and bones. Thanks to the new order and war bonds, the route thrived. Merchant caravans filled the wide road. Iron, ore, and furs flowed from the west, silk and spices from the capital. The fields were green with wheat, promising a harvest. New villages and stations dotted the landscape. It's amazing how quickly people start building things when you threaten to tax them into oblivion. Beautiful. I slowed my horse, my heart easing. It was more than scenery. It was the order I had built, the prosperity bought with the blood of my soldiers. Sebastian approached on horseback, handing me a water skin. We're nearing the Greystone Corridor, the gateway to the western border. I drank, feeling refreshed. We're bypassing Thorn City, I decided, eyeing the mountains. This mission involves the Queen's private affairs and elven secrets. We must remain discreet. I ordered my men to hide their insignia and advance via side paths at full speed. The Black Raven Knights swiftly concealed their armor's emblems. Night fell. The streamlined unit slipped off the main trade route into the vast wilderness. Only the wind, carrying the wild, free scent of the western border, greeted its returning lord. Spring arrived late, but fierce in the west. I crossed the final spur of the Black Iron Mountains. I reined in my horse, stunned by the view. The once barren exile's land had been transformed. The heart of the Obsidian territory, now the Duke of Dragonfire's domain, teemed with vibrant life. The frozen plains were now blanketed in lush, glowing vegetation. Winter wheat had surged in growth, and the moat teemed with large fish. The magic tide's influence, I mused, sensing the air. It's nice to know the local ecosystem is finally doing its job. The atmosphere was thick with restless, active magic. It was as if the ancient land had been reborn. Sentries on the walls cheered. The Duke has returned. The drawbridge lowered, welcoming their master home after his triumphs at the royal capital. Old John and Hardy Walter waited as I dismounted. His loyal retainers approached, visibly moved. Welcome home, Duke. Old John teared up, spotting the guardian medal on my chest. You've worked hard, I said. Handing off my reins, I asked, how is the territory? Everything is better than ever. Hardy, now a capable administrator, stepped forward. He reported that resources had tripled since Spring City's workshops became operational. The environment has improved drastically for no apparent reason. Hardy pointed to flowers blooming out of season. Crops grow rapidly, and ore quality has surged. Everyone calls it a miracle brought by the Queen's coronation. I felt a pang of worry rather than joy. The magic tide brought mutation and danger. Increase patrols, I ordered sternly. Extend the perimeter to 30 miles. Eliminate any mutated beasts immediately. Also, have Master Glenn study these ores for potential equipment forging. Hardy complied. Inside the Lord's mansion, I sat on my obsidian chair. The cold, hard stone felt grounding compared to the Sun Palace, which apparently prioritized aesthetics over the basic human need for lumbar support. John and Hardy detailed the post-war recovery. Compensation for the wounded had been paid with bonuses. Spring City's new district was established, and tools and weapons were stockpiled. A caravan from the Eastern Territory had arrived with tribute and a letter from Duke Russell. The reports continued. Every decision here impacted hundreds of thousands of lives. I, however, was distracted, my mind on the royal capital. "My lord," John asked, sensing my absence. "Are you tired?" John lowered his voice. "Our informants in the capital say the queen is unwell." The retainers looked anxious. Their future was tied to the queen. Her health was the foundation of their new regime. I sighed, realizing rumors of an heir were spreading. "Do not worry," I said with a confident smile. "Lynn is just exhausted. I've returned to secure special supplements for her." "Special supplements?" John asked. I stood up, ending the meeting. "I will handle the paperwork. You are dismissed. We shall hold a banquet tonight. Everyone deserves to rest." They bowed and left. Alone, my smile vanished. It's exhausting, pretending to be a pillar of stability when I'm mostly held together by caffeine and spite. I looked out at my thriving territory. Stability and power were my achievements. Yet, without resolving the hidden threat, this prosperity was a castle on sand. I needed a miracle involving the source of life itself. Night fell, and the banquet concluded. I stood on the top terrace. I let the night wind clear my head. Moonlight bathed the obsidian territory in silver. I ignored the city below. I stared north toward the mist-shrouded night-song forest. It was the elves' ancient, forbidden domain. I touched a handkerchief embroidered with an iris. I could not let my wife face such pressure alone. I must go. I decided to go alone. It was a private, dangerous quest where fewer companions meant greater safety and sincerity. I leaped from the terrace, gliding like a shadow into the darkness beyond the walls. I moved as a blur toward the northern forest. An hour later, I reached the edge of Nightsong Forest. The magical density here was like a rushing river compared to the obsidian territory stream. The air was thick with wood elemental energy, every breath infusing me with vitality. The once deadly, gloomy forest outskirts were now vibrant. The moss beneath my feet glowed with a faint, starlit luminescence. Ancient trees swayed in the breeze, their rustling sounding like hushed whispers. Glowing sprites flitted from the grass, circling me with curiosity before darting away in playful laughter. The magic tide's influence is amplified tenfold here, I noted with internal alarm. This high-concentration magic environment was a paradise for mages, but a lethal poison to ordinary humans. Every beast here had evolved into a magical beast. A deep roar echoed from the dense forest, shaking leaves from the branches, but I ignored it. Relying on memory, I navigated the complex forest labyrinth, skillfully bypassing the territories of high-level magical beasts. After half an hour, the mist cleared to reveal a serene, ink-green lake reflecting a massive, holy full moon. This was the entrance to the elves' sanctuary. I stood by the shore, overcome with nostalgia. Last time I was here, I was a struggling lord who nearly died facing the beast guarding this place. Now, I was the world-renowned Duke of Dragonfire, the Queen's husband, and the master of these lands. It's amazing how much more confidence you have when you aren't currently bleeding out. "Valerian, are you there?" I whispered. The lake suddenly parted, erupting into a massive water column that turned into mist under the moonlight. A mountain-sized figure emerged. It was a massive aquatic beast with blue scales, a long neck, and a majestic dragon-like head. Valerian's lantern-like eyes glowed with pale gold light. It lowered its head toward me, the scent of water and immense pressure washing over me. I looked into those golden eyes with calm, gentle composure. Valerian snorted, releasing 2 jets of white steam. The human it once viewed as an ant now radiated an aura of power that even the beast found daunting. More importantly, it smelled a familiar scent on me, the scent of that person. "Human, Eli," it rumbled. "You have returned." Valerian's voice lacked its former hostility, replaced by a complex emotion. It pulled back and swam aside, revealing the whirlpool entrance at the center of the lake. Then, to my surprise, the proud guardian beast bowed its head toward me in a gesture of respect. It was as if it were welcoming a returning hero or paying tribute to a distinguished guest about to meet the queen. "Enter," Valerian said. "She is waiting for you." "She?" I wondered if Queen Irene knew I was coming. "Thank you." I nodded, taking a deep breath. Looking at the swirling vortex leading to the unknown depths, I did not hesitate. "For Lynn," I whispered and leaped. I plunged into the vortex, falling rapidly toward the sanctuary hidden for a millennium at the lake's bottom. Valerian watched me disappear, its tail slapping the water. The lake returned to stillness, reflecting the eternal moon, while the wind sang an ancient ballad through the trees. Ancient barriers held back the lake water, creating a massive air-filled tunnel. I slid through the passage at high speed, the scenery blurring into streaks of light. With a sudden sensation of weightlessness, I landed firmly on soft grass. I stood up, brushed off the moisture, and scanned my surroundings. It's nice to know the afterlife, or wherever this is, has decent landscaping. I remembered this elven sanctuary as a cold, lonely ruin. However, I froze at what I saw. The cold isolation was gone, replaced by a vibrant, noisy scene. The once barren space was now filled with exotic magical flowers, the air thick with their fragrance. Hee. Faster, faster, you silly dragon. A crisp, childish laugh rang out. I frowned. A child? Here? I pushed through the dense magical plants toward the sound. Emerging from the flowers, my sword clattered to the ground. I stood petrified, as if struck by Medusa's gaze. My eyes widened, my jaw hanging slack in sheer shock. The scene before me was impossible. On the grassy field, the dragonet Balerion, once only half a man's height, had grown exponentially. Its wings spanned 4 or 5 meters, its scales shimmering like obsidian under the sanctuary's artificial sunlight. Though still young, it already possessed the majesty of a sky sovereign. The dragonet was hovering low, performing daring flight maneuvers. And on its back sat a small, porcelain-like boy dressed in fine elven silk, a warm life gem hanging from his neck. Most heart-stopping of all was the boy's hair, a shock of silver, identical to mine. That color was extremely rare, found only among the Aurora royal family, the elves, and me. Apparently, I'd started a trend I didn't remember authorizing. The boy gripped the dragon's horns, laughing with pure, adventurous excitement. His golden eyes mirrored the same spirit I had as a child. Fly higher, baby, he cheered. Balerion indulged him, flapping its wings to climb higher. Below, a marmot named Gulu scrambled after them, panting and terrified. Gulu's short legs moved like a blur, clutching a blanket, its face a mask of despair. Slow down, Gulu shrieked. Balerion, you brainless lizard. If he falls, the princess will skin me for gloves. My poor back. This is unbearable. My mind reeled, my logic shattered. A child. Silver hair. A dragon. The boy looked barely over a year old, yet his physical vitality was clearly superhuman. His features, the contour, the eyes, the slight upward curve of his smile. This, my fingers trembled. A visceral, blood-deep resonance surged through me. I remembered the 100-year illusion trial. In that dream, I had lived a lifetime, loved a woman, and conceived a child with Queen Irene. Though the memory had faded like a dream, the sensation remained. As I stood in a daze, the boy on the dragon sensed me. The boy stopped laughing, turning his bright golden eyes directly toward me. One large, one small. Two silver-haired, golden-eyed beings stared at each other across the field. The boy wasn't afraid. He tilted his head, curious about the stranger. He pointed a chubby finger at me and shouted to the marmot below. Gulu, Gulu, there's a strange uncle. What? A strange uncle? Gulu looked up, then froze. Its eyes bulged, mouth agape. Eli. Gulu shrieked, dropping the blanket. How did you get in here? Gulu pointed at me, then at the entrance, and roared at the dragon. Balerion, you traitorous, stupid dragon. Didn't the princess say not to let this heartbreaker, this human, inside? You fell asleep again. It's all over. Gulu paced frantically, pulling at his fur in despair. Heartbreaker. My heart skipped a beat at the word, though I'd prefer a title that sounded slightly less like a tabloid headline. Ignoring Gulu's shrieks and the dragonet landing nearby, I remained motionless. My gaze pierced through the flower fields toward the heart of the sanctuary. There, emerging from beneath the trees, was Irene. The elf princess and mistress of the sanctuary remained as ethereal and beautiful as ever. Her silver hair cascaded like a waterfall, framing those pointed ears and a face of breathtaking refinement. She held a small cloak, seemingly intended for the child riding the dragon. As she stepped out and spotted the shocked man standing at the edge of the meadow, she froze. The cloak slipped from her fingers. Her eyes, usually cold and detached with divine indifference, were now turbulent. The icy facade shattered, revealing a storm of complex emotions. There was resentment from being abandoned, resignation toward fate, and panic at having her secret exposed. She stood silent, offering no scream. She simply watched the man who had suddenly intruded upon the quiet world she shared with her child. She watched the father of her son. The wind died down, and even the dragonet, sensing the shift, folded its wings and landed. The air turned stagnant. I looked from Irene to the silver-haired boy peeking out from beneath the dragon's wing. The 100-year dream had left behind this child, the most tangible bond of that illusion. Irene. My voice was raspy. I wanted to approach, but my legs felt like lead. What could I say? Long time no see. I'm sorry. It's not like I had a prepared speech for accidental fatherhood. Or perhaps, is this our child? In this world of magic and destiny, a duke recently crowned as a queen's husband, an elf princess hiding in a sanctuary, and their half-blood son stood at a crossroads, reunited by fate. The wind remained still in the sanctuary's flower fields. I stood at the edge of the grass, eyes locked on the figure in the pale green dress. My throat was dry, my heart hammering. Irene, the high and mighty elf princess, stood motionless, the cloak still dangling from her hand. Her expression was complex, revealing a vulnerability and resentment upon seeing me. They remained silent for a long time, the scent of flowers drifting between them. Long time no see. Irene finally broke the silence. She took a breath, trying to sound as calm as if speaking to a casual visitor. Eli Black. I felt my voice tremble, a nervousness I had never felt even when facing armies. Long time no see. Princess Irene. The simple greeting felt like a lifetime apart. My gaze drifted to the dragonet, Balerion, now grounded. On its back, the boy with silver hair peeked out, his eyes shimmering in the artificial sunlight. The clear eyes, the small nose, the pursed lips, the resemblance was uncanny. He looked just like a young me. As I stepped forward, Gulu the marmot scrambled up, hands on his hips, blocking the path. Stop. You aren't allowed near him. You heartbreaker. You liar. Gulu pointed at me, shouting, You have the nerve to return. Do you know how much life force the princess sacrificed to give birth to this little ancestor? Gulu, shut up, Irene commanded, a flush of panic on her face. But princess, this human defiled you. I said be quiet. Gulu shrank back, grumbling, but continued to glare at me with his beady eyes. The boy on the dragon's back, sensing the tension, slid down nimbly. He walked on his short legs toward me with determination. He tilted his head, staring at me with wide silver eyes as if verifying something. My breath hitched as I looked at the boy, who reached only to my thigh. Hello, the boy said, his voice bright as a lark. He pointed a chubby finger at my hair, then his own. Gulu said I have a father, but he went to save the world. The boy tilted his head and asked earnestly, Your hair is like mine. Are you my father? The innocent question shattered my defenses. I knelt to be eye level with the boy. Seeing my own face reflected in the boy's curious, expectant eyes, my eyes reddened. I reached out, trembling, afraid to touch him. Yes, I choked out. I am your father. The boy's eyes lit up. He didn't cry. He smiled brightly and threw his arms around my neck. I knew it. Gulu didn't lie to me. Feeling the soft, warm body in my arms, I felt my heart overflow with happiness and guilt. This wasn't a dream. This was the miracle left behind by the 100-year dream. Irene turned away, not wanting to show her weakness. Follow me, she whispered. Deep in the sanctuary, by a white jade bed, she sat down. Watching the father and son play with the dragonet, her expression finally calmed. She revealed the hidden truth. The elven bloodline is drying up. The tree of life is dying. We needed new life force to continue our race. She looked at me with a hint of apology. In that coffin, I used life magic to merge your soul with mine. I took a sliver of your origin to conceive this child. She pointed to the boy chasing the marmot. His name is Alien. He is a child of miracle, possessing human and high elf blood, with a natural affinity for dragons. His birth allowed the tree of life to sprout anew. Alien. The name froze me. A memory surfaced. In the 100-year dream, they had been married and had a son and daughter. The girl was Eli, the boy was in reality, The child was named Alien, a fusion of those names, a testament to her secret love. She remembered everything. I looked at her, the woman who had borne the burden of this secret and raised our child in isolation. She claimed it was just to save her race, but in that name, I saw her hidden heart. I stepped forward and pulled her into a tight embrace, ignoring her shock. You? Irene stiffened. I'm sorry, I whispered, for making you suffer alone. Irene was stunned. Her cold retorts died in her throat. She pushed at my chest weakly, trying to regain her pride. Who suffered? I just borrowed you to ensure the elf's survival. You're just a tool. Is that so? I smiled, not exposing her red ears. I stepped back. Thank you, Irene. Regardless, Alien is my son, and that will never change. Irene turned away. Think what you want. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to compose my emotions. Apparently, my capacity for emotional whiplash is still top tier. I hadn't forgotten my purpose. Irene, I said seriously, beyond seeing Alien, I have a vital matter to ask for your help. I explained Lynn's situation and Helen's diagnosis. Her body is healthy, but she cannot conceive. Helen said it's like a lock. As a master of life magic, do you know why? Upon hearing my description, Irene's expression turned grave. She approached the tree of life, touching its trunk to sense its essence. Irene sighed, telling me that Lynn's condition was not an illness, but a vicious, ancestral curse of severance. The curse originated from Roderick LaRoche, the LaRoche family ancestor, who once loved an elven queen. To prove his loyalty to humanity and secure his power, Roderick murdered his pregnant elven queen on the eve of his coronation. With her dying breath, the queen cursed Roderick's bloodline. Irene's voice echoed through the sanctuary. The curse dictates that direct female descendants of the LaRoche line cannot bear powerful heirs. Pregnancy would result in the mother's death. Irene noted that my own growing power only exacerbates the curse within Lynn. The stronger I become, the more lethal the curse's backlash against Lynn. Breaking the lock on her bloodline would kill Lynn, leaving me pale with horror. I realized the will of heaven was merely the weight of ancestral sin. I desperately asked if there was any way to save her. I clenched my fists, refusing to accept this fate. Irene looked at me, then at our son, Alien, playing on a dragon nearby. Alien was our hope. Irene explained that the antidote wasn't power, but forgiveness to dissolve the hatred fueling the curse. It required someone of high elf blood who harbored deep resentment toward the family. Only if that person chose to let go of their hatred and offer a sincere blessing could the curse be lifted. Only then would the curse dissipate. The sanctuary was filled with the scent of flowers and flowing magic. I stood torn between the beautiful Irene and our son, Alien. I faced an impossible dilemma. My wife, Lynn, in the royal capital, burdened by the curse. She needed my strength for the throne and the antidote to survive. I felt both deep responsibility and love for her. Yet, I could not abandon Irene, the elven princess who raised our child in isolation. I could not betray my son and Irene without bearing the mark of a traitor for the rest of my life. Nor could I abandon my vows to Lynn, who waited for me in Thorn City. Irene sensed my hesitation, her silver eyes piercing my soul. She asked if I was trying to find a balance between two women that simply could not exist. It's a bold strategy, assuming I'm capable of managing even one woman's expectations. I tried to speak, but words failed me. Irene silenced me with a finger to my lips. She stood tall, radiating the pride of the elven royal family. She looked at me with firm, deep affection. She declared that she and Alien belonged to the Night Song Forest and the Sanctuary. They would never go to the chaotic, greedy human royal capital to compete for anything. To an elf, such things were worthless. I felt a surge of guilt and respect for her dignity. Irene grabbed my collar, pulling me closer. She demanded I never forget them. I was Alien's father and her man. I nodded. My defense is crumbling. It's hard to maintain a stoic facade when you're being manhandled by royalty. Alien ran over, diving into Irene's arms. Irene asked their son to help her awaken the tree of life to save my friend. Alien agreed, and they walked to the tree, Irene chanting an ancient elven spell. Magic surged, drawing green light from across the forest. Alien touched the trunk, his body glowing with silver light. The tree swayed, rustling with joy at the child's touch. A branch lowered, bearing a fruit that shimmered with moonlight. The fruit was crystalline, etched with mysterious runes. Catch it. Irene looked pale, the ritual having drained her. I caught the moon fruit, which radiated a calming power. Irene explained it contained the essence of the tree of life, forgiveness, and the hope of new life. It would dissolve the curse and reshape Lin's foundation. I looked at the fruit, then at the exhausted Irene and the proud alien. Thank you, I whispered. We shared a simple, surreal dinner on the grass. We ate wild fruit, honey wine, and dried meat. Gulu the marmot complained about me ruining his garden while munching on meat. Irene sipped honey wine, her gaze soft. Alien sat in my lap, playing with my fingers. Alien wanted to show off his magic. Pop! A flower bud bloomed instantly, its petals shifting colors at his command. It was natural, nonverbal magic. I felt immense pride in my son, but my heart remained heavy with guilt. Missing my child's birth and first steps, I sighed. He's a genius. Of course, Alien is my son, Irene replied. Irene lifted her chin, the frost in her eyes melting into rare tenderness. The sanctuary felt like a loving home. As night fell, the glowing stones simulated a starry sky. Alien, exhausted, dozed off in my arms. Gulu, Irene called. Gulu wiped his greasy mouth and picked up the sleeping child. Time for bed in the dragon nest, little ancestor. Don't disturb your parents. Gulu chuckled and flew off toward the dragon nest on the sleepy dragonet. Apparently, my parental authority is currently being outsourced to a rodent. Alone in the quiet sanctuary, the sound of the moonlight spring filled the air as I and Irene exchanged intense, longing gazes. I stared at Irene's breathtaking face under the starlight. Overwhelmed, I reached out to stroke her cheek. Irene leaned into my palm, eyes closed, her eyelashes trembling. I kissed her. Irene wrapped her arms around my neck, returning my kiss passionately. This kiss bridged the gap of their identities. This isn't a dream, Irene, I whispered. I know, she replied. Irene shed her elven princess pride, revealing only a woman's soft affection. Hold me, Eli. We embraced and fell onto the white jade couch. Clothes fell away as months of longing and guilt erupted. For this night, we were not a duke and a princess, but two souls unburdened by duty. I poured my tenderness into every touch, repaying my debt to her. Irene blossomed like a moonflower, accepting me completely. Our souls merged in the sacred moonlight. At dawn, I woke in Irene's arms. Watching her sleep, I felt a profound, unprecedented peace. Duty called, the royal capital, and Lynn awaited. I dressed, and Irene, understanding, urged me to go. Outside, aliens circled on Balerion, waving goodbye. My eyes reddened as I promised to return. I turned to Irene and the weeping marmot. I will be king, but I will always return if you need me, I promised. I turned to Gulu. Take care of them. Next time, I'll bring the best nuts and wine. It's a bold strategy, trying to bribe a rodent with snacks, but I've seen weirder diplomacy. Gulu's eyes lit up, drool forming. It's a deal. Don't lie. Hurry back with the food. I took one last look at the mother and son before turning away. The mist closed, sealing off the mythical world. Touching the warm box at my waist, I knew it wasn't a dream. My heart was now split between the throne and the forest. Haya, I rode toward my future, the king of two worlds. It's a bold title, though I suspect the paperwork alone will be the death of me. Night in Orlandia wrapped the reborn city in velvet. The sound of hooves shattered the Sun Palace's silence. Guards recognized the cold face and knelt in terror. It was Eli Black, Duke of Dragonfire. I rode straight to the Queen's chambers, still covered in dust. Where is Her Majesty? The headmaid stammered, resting in her chambers. Everyone out. No one within 100 meters. Death to those who disobey. I entered the chamber and slammed the heavy doors shut. Lynn sat by the window, turning as I entered. She dropped her book in shock. Eli. I silenced her, my eyes full of guilt, and produced the wooden box. Inside lay the moon fruit, glowing with ethereal light. The moon fruit, I rasped. The only cure. Lynn felt an instinctive, overwhelming hunger for the fruit's life force. She ate it, and it dissolved into a cooling, sweet torrent. A wave of vitality erupted from her. The icy pain in her abdomen vanished, washed away by warmth. She felt like a frozen land meeting the first rays of spring. The lock that had caused her despair shattered. Lin touched her stomach, feeling the vibrant flow of life. It's gone? I'm healed. She wept with relief. I took her hand, my expression grave. Lin, I must tell you something. About the fruit, my time in the forest, and the child. I chose honesty to prevent future cracks in their relationship, though I suspected I was mostly just ensuring my own future headache. I recounted this century-long dream, Irene's sacrifice, and Alien, the boy with my silver hair. I offered no excuses. Silence filled the room, broken only by the candle's crackle. Lin listened, her grip on my hand tightening until her nails dug into my skin. Finally, she turned her back to me, her shoulders trembling. As the Queen of Orlando, Lin Aurora understood the weight of the moon fruit better than anyone. It was an elven treasure, a salvation forged from that woman's life force. Without it, Lin would have succumbed to bloodline backlash, and the kingdom would have collapsed without an heir. The woman in the forest had saved her and her kingdom. Lin wiped away her tears, exhaling deeply. Turning to me, her vulnerability vanished, replaced by a complex gaze. That woman in the forest saved me and the kingdom, Lin said softly. As queen, I am grateful. She bit her lip, looking at me. I will tolerate the child's existence. As long as he never enters the royal capital or threatens my own child's position, I can pretend he doesn't exist. It was her bottom line as a queen and her greatest concession as a woman. I started to speak, but Lin stood abruptly, her demeanor shifting from noble to something dangerously intense. Her reason was being consumed by a long-repressed, near-manic fire. It was a wife's possessiveness, a woman's jealousy, and a trauma response to the brink of betrayal. This doesn't mean I forgive you, Eli, she said, looming over me. Trembling, she grabbed my collar and pulled me close. You made me suffer for a month. You spent a lifetime with another woman, even if it was a dream. You owe me, she whispered against my lips. I'm going to punish you. Begging won't help tonight. She shoved me back onto the bed. She was no longer the fragile girl or the cold queen. She was a thorn rose, alluring, dangerous, and lethal. With a sharp tear of fabric, she vented her rage. She clawed at my clothes, leaving red marks on my chest. This was her punishment, denying me any control or respite. She was a greedy predator, purging her fear of loss and her jealousy of the woman who had held me for a century. I tried to speak, but she silenced me with a biting, aggressive kiss. Eli Pendragon, she rasped. Your body, your heart, every inch of you. Tonight, you belong to me. Don't you dare think of anyone else. Seeing her eyes red with love and jealousy, I surrendered. I knew I owed her this. Fine, I said, pulling her into my arms. I am yours. I yielded to her, letting the queen drown me in earthly desire. The storm raged in the Sun Palace. There were no subjects or reason, only raw, desperate possession. She sought to brand me as hers, deep within my soul. By dawn, the room was left in disarray, the air heavy with the scent of their encounter. Lin lay exhausted on my chest, her silver hair cascading over me. She couldn't move a finger, yet she gripped my arm tightly. Fearing I might vanish like a dream, she held on. I, awake, stroked her back. Lin opened her eyes, the anxiety gone. In its place was the lazy satisfaction of a mistress of her own fate. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the new life within. Eli, she whispered, we're having a child. A true heir to this kingdom. I kissed her, promising it would be so. Months later, the news shook the kingdom. Queen Lin's pregnancy was a beacon of light, dispelling all gloom and rumors. I suppose being the queen's husband means my personal life is now a matter of public record. The talk of a succession crisis was shattered instantly. The royal bloodline was secured, and the regime's legitimacy was absolute. Old nobles who had hoped to exploit the lack of an heir were left in despair, especially as Buck and Wolfgang led the Knights' Order in a new, iron-blooded purge. They realized the old era was dead. A new one had dawned with the blooming of the thorn rose. Time flowed like the Heron River, silently reshaping the landscape. It turned blood and fire into cold, glorious names in history books. 10 years passed. Orlandia, once a war-torn ruin, had been completely transformed. At dawn, the highest tower of the Sun Palace flew a massive banner. It was a black flag with gold embroidery. A roaring dragon encircled a sword, topped by a golden crown. It was the joint emblem of Pendragon and Aurora, the symbol of the Orlando Empire, the sole hegemon of the continent. Orlandia was no longer the filthy, crowded medieval city of a decade ago. Streets were widened and paved with stone, supported by my massive underground drainage system. Wooden shacks had been replaced by stone buildings. Glass windows glittered in the sun, displaying treasures from across the world. Fresh white bread, a baker shouted. Once a luxury for nobles, white bread was now common. Thanks to my high-yield, cold-resistant wheat and new farming tools, food production had tripled. It turns out people are much less likely to revolt when they aren't starving. Even the lowest dock worker could afford white bread and sugared milk for breakfast. Their sickly pallor was replaced by health and prosperity. Conversations no longer centered on famine, plague, or war. Did you hear? Another expedition is setting sail. That's nothing. My son wrote that they've discovered a new continent. It was a golden age. To the north, the once dreaded frozen lands had changed. The winds were still cold, but the era of barbaric raids was over. On the northern trade route, built by me, caravans stretched endlessly toward Herengard. Southern grain, spirits, cotton, and iron flowed into every northern tribe. In exchange, furs, minerals, and icefield herbs traveled south. The northerners realized that mining and farming were far more profitable than the life-threatening risk of raiding. Economic chains dismantled the North's predatory instincts. I repurposed these warriors into the Northern Expeditionary Army, sending them to suppress magical beasts, explore wilderness, and expand into new continents. The North's bellicose nature was transformed into the Empire's sharpest blade of expansion. To the south, the region remained the Empire's prosperous economic heart. The Medici family, once bold enough to attempt buying royal power, was reduced to a hollow symbol. I kept the family alive, installing the hedonistic and compliant Lorenzo as a puppet. It's amazing how much more agreeable people become when their bank accounts are empty. Stripped of real power, the Southern nobles shifted their focus from political scheming to securing positions at the Orlando Royal Academy, where I served as honorary principal. Meanwhile, I launched the Great Navigation Plan, utilizing Southern maritime technology and new warships. Excess Southern capital and Eastern adventurers were channeled into the vast, uncharted seas. Internal conflicts were diluted by the infinite external world, fueling the Empire's rapid rise. At the Sun Palace training grounds, a young voice rang out. A 9-year-old silver-haired boy practiced swordplay with a wooden blade. His movements were precise, steady, and disciplined, revealing a maturity beyond his years. He possessed Lin's silver hair and his father's golden eyes. Arthur, the imperial crown prince and heir, ignored his instructor's suggestion to rest. Father says there are no shortcuts, Arthur insisted, continuing his 500-swing regimen. In the distant west, near the Night Song Forest, a black dragon roared, soaring over the canopy with a silver-haired youth on its back. Dressed in ranger leathers with an elven bow, he looked every bit the adventurer. His wild, free laughter carried on the wind. This was Alien. The child of miracles, raised in the forest, had become the guardian of the border. Inheriting his parents' spirit and magic, he became the continent's only dragon knight. Though living worlds apart, the brothers remained deeply connected. Every summer, the black dragon landed at the Sun Palace, bringing forest gifts to the crown prince. Arthur shared imperial news in return, their bond maintained through me. At dusk, I stood on the Sun Palace's highest tower. I gazed out over the empire I had forged with my own hands. 10 years had granted me a profound, mountain-like authority, far removed from my days as a struggling, exiled outcast. Queen Lin approached me softly. She had grown into a majestic queen, her dignity etched into her being. Yet, with me, she remained his devoted wife. They held hands, watching the bustling canals and the lights of a thriving civilization. We planted this future, she said. I realized my information system had long since fallen silent. I no longer required its guidance or prompts. I possessed the wisdom to see through fog and the power to command destiny. I had carved my name into history. Sebastian, the loyal butler, appeared from the shadows. The butler remained unchanged, as impeccable as ever in his tuxedo. I suspect he's actually a clockwork automaton, but I'm too afraid to check. Dinner is ready, Your Majesty. And Sebastian smiled. A dragon approaches from the west. Master Alien has returned. I beamed. Good. The family is finally reunited. The wind whipped my silver hair and the massive black dragon flag above. The flag cast a shadow over the setting sun, but at the horizon, a new dawn rose, the dawn of the Pendragon Empire. I knew my personal journey was a chapter in a much greater legend. From an exiled bastard to a conqueror of the wilderness, the throne, and fate itself. The name I had become an eternal legend. It's a bit of a mouthful for a tombstone, but I'll take it. End of book. If you like this video, go watch my new kingdom building video. Sent to die in the frozen north. He came back with Gatlings. If this recap hit, that next one is a lord sent to die in the frozen north who came back with Gatlings.